Hey guys, tonight we step into a room that smells faintly of ink and lamp oil, where frost rims the window panes and the world is quiet enough to hear paper breathe. A single candle throws a small stubborn halo over a desk piled with notebooks. You can almost taste the dust of chalk. Somewhere a clock is patient. And here, at the edge of old Russia, a schoolteacher scratches equations that lean toward the sky, imagining machines that climb beyond air and fear. You probably wouldn't survive the smell of 19th century chemistry, but you would admire its courage. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me your city and the local time you're listening. I love tracing our constellation across the map. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand beside Konstantin Tsiolkovsky in Kaluga, late 1890 seconds to 1903, as he rubs sleep from his eyes and returns to the line that keeps teasing him, the mathematics of escape. The room is cold. The candle gutters whenever a draft sneaks beneath the door. He is a schoolteacher by day, astonishing students with thought experiments. By night, he becomes a cartographer of the untraveled. He writes of rockets fueled by liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen, of staging, of metal shells that carry instruments' tiny minds into the velvet above. Every light begins as someone's stubborn idea, he thinks, and stubbornness is just faith with calluses. His pen scratches out the rocket equation, dreadfully simple and yet full of consequence. If you wish to break free, you must throw something backward fast enough. He draws a straight, careful arrow and labels it exhaust, then sketches a ladder, no, a stairway to space. The candle's flame wavers, like a small sun considering a promotion. You hear the soft tick of ink drying. In that fragile warmth, the future invention takes its first unsteady breath. Not in metal, but in symbols. Outside, the streets are crusted with snow. Inside, he calculates specific impulse, while the samovar mutters in the corner. He remembers reading Jules Verne, remembers the imaginative bravado of a cannon shell to the moon, and smiles at the romance and the error. Cannons crush dreams as easily as they crush people. Steady thrust is kinder. He adds a footnote for compassion in his mind. Technology should lift, not bruise. The candle smell mixes with iron from the stove. You feel how thin the membrane is between past and possibility. He does not call them artificial satellites, yet in the way we will. He calls them vehicles, stations, platforms, habitats of thought hung like lanterns around Earth. In 1903, he publishes The Exploration of Cosmic Space by Means of Reaction Devices, a title as dry as winter bread, yet inside it pulses a proposal almost indecently audacious. Multi-stage rockets, guidance gyroscopes, and the idea of living beyond air. He writes of spheres with instruments, of radio signals that could fall back like snow. He strokes the page as if to quiet it. Ideas can grow anxious, eager to be born. You notice how he never raises his voice. The loudest sound in this room is the nib's tiny rasp. There are no crowds, no thunder of engines, only the patience of numbers aligning. He sketches a sphere with 4 slender whiskers, purely conceptual, a seed waiting half a century to sprout. On the windowsill, frost feathers look like a topography of distant worlds. The lamp flame leans and steadies again. You could measure time here by the rhythm of his breath. Kaluga is not a center of empire. It is a small town with larger winters, and yet that suits him. He is deaf from childhood illness. He learned to listen to thought instead. He ties his imagination to the discipline of physics, the way a kite is tied to a string freedom with responsibility. He notes that vacuum is not nothing. It is a road without air's drag. He writes that rockets are the only vehicles that can breathe in that roadless road. We are all trying to build roads through the unknown, he muses, some with faith, some with steel. You lean in as he draws a cross-section. Tanks, pumps, combustion chamber, and a bell-shaped nozzle where fire will learn to speak in one direction. He shades the nozzle dark, then lighter where gases expand. The texture of the paper makes the plume look grainy, like starlight dusted on canvas. He marks mass ratios in the margins, the ceaseless arithmetic of sacrifice, what to keep, what to burn. Progress always asks for a trade. And wisdom is choosing what you can let go. He pauses, fingers blackened with ink, and stares through his own reflection in the window at the night above Kaluga. Somewhere out there, the aurora sometimes drips green silk. But not tonight. Tonight is a hard black dome, like a kettle inverted over the town. He taps the glass gently, as if negotiating with it. Someday, he thinks, there will be human-made stars that glide in patient paths, that listen and look and talk. Someday, children will shade their eyes and watch a steady point cross the dark, like a thought moving from doubt to certainty. Books clutter the desk. Newton's Principia, notes on gases, a little journal where he keeps failed attempts and half-jokes, because humour keeps despair from becoming permanent. He writes one now, "I have not yet left Earth, but I have left the idea of staying." The candle gutters as if laughing. You smile in the dim, warmed by the reassurance that genius does not always stride. Sometimes it hobbles, stops, and rewrites the same line 12 times. He drafts a letter he will never send to future engineers. Remember that your engines will be built of patience. Remember that vacuum rewards precision, not pride. Remember that if you hope to hang instruments in the sky, you will first need to teach metal to survive its own fire. He folds the letter away. The room returns to the patterned quiet of a sanctuary. Somewhere, a cat coughs. The stove ticks as it settles. He puts down the pen and takes up a ruler, setting tiny marks along a curve. Measurement becomes prayer. He adds a note about escape velocity, about 11.2 kilometers per second, an oddly lyrical number if you repeat it long enough, and writes that one need not leap directly. One may accelerate in stages, circle, while climbing, like a moth learning the shape of a lamp's glow. There is mercy in spirals, he thinks. The universe often allows us to arrive gently. You can sense the outline of what will come. The beeping spheres, the tilted antennas, the belts of radiation no one expects, the global voices braided by radio. But tonight, in this cold room, they are only a hush under his breath. A promise rising in ink. He draws one last line. A circle wrapped around Earth, thin as a hair, and writes beside it, period. His handwriting is small, practical, unromantic. The romance is all in the courage required to believe the circle could be real. He reaches to snuff the candle and hesitates. Instead, he cups the flame and watches it steady, a tiny sun obedient to a human hand. The air smells of tallow and burnt dust. He whispers something you can't quite hear, a private vow to the night. Outside, sleigh runners hiss over packed snow. A dog barks exactly twice. Inside, a theory clicks into place like a gear finding its mate. A long breath, a small smile. The future tugs on its boots. When the light finally goes out, the afterimage floats behind your eyelids like a bright coin. The room darkens to a memory. The pages cool, and above the sleeping town, the real stars keep their patient roots, unaware that a new kind of star has just been sketched into the margins of morning. We never know which quiet hour will tip the world, only that history favors those who stay long enough at the desk to meet it. You wake to thunder that isn't weather. The floor trembles, the air tastes metallic, and a horizon of dunes shivers in a bleak wind. It is the early 1940 seconds, and the idea we met by candlelight has been conscripted. At Peenemünde on the Baltic shore, engineers in oil-stained coats hunch over drawings as long as dining tables, their pencils racing to beat a war's appetite. The A4 soon called the V2 takes shape. Tanks for liquid oxygen, tanks for a watered-down alcohol, a bell of steel where flame will be taught to push in one direction. On 3 October 1942, a prototype rises clean and hard and reaches the edge of space, a first that no trumpet celebrates. You feel the ground's complaint in your bones. You stand behind a blast shield as the turbopumps scream awake. Driven by steam born from decomposed hydrogen peroxide, the smell sharp as a hospital rag. Lines shudder. Valves snap open. Ethanol meets oxygen and becomes thunder. The engine's throat glows like a small red dawn, and the rocket lifts, slow at first, then eager, painting the sky with a white vein of exhaust that unravels into the cold. It is terrifying, and it is beautiful. and it is not built for wonder. In the distance, gulls scatter like torn paper. The drawings are precise, but the world is messy. Guidance gyros are coddled as if they were nervous animals. Wiring looms sweat in the salt air. Men write numbers on clipboards with hands that won't stop shaking. When the vehicle tumbles, the sound is a wrong chord, played too loud. When it flies, a strange hush follows, as if sky and sea agree to listen. You think of the teacher in Kaluga and that patient candle, and realize that even pure ideas must pass through fire to learn to live. Factories stamp out parts as sirens moan. By 1944, these engines carry steel into London and Antwerp. They fall faster than sound, meaning the noise comes after the ruin, like a cruel echo. War teaches lessons no one asked to learn. You walk through a testing hall with scoring on the floor where flames licked at concrete. You smell scorched paint, old oil, a sweetness of alcohol that never quite leaves the air. Every light begins as someone's stubborn idea, you remember, and add a quiet footnote. Some lights are lit under a terrible sky. Names move in and out of focus. Wernher von Braun, Walter Dornberger ambition braided with survival. Across a continent, another name, Sergei Korolev, staggers through the machinery of a state and returns, chastened but unbroken, to the same problem. How to coax a column of fire into obedience. Everyone is building ladders, forced to call them arrows. In labs that smell of varnish and ozone, young technicians balance gyroscopes on fingertips to feel their invisible stubbornness. A gyro wants to keep its truth. An engineer asks it to share. Then the maps change hands. The war ends not with clarity but with sorting. Blueprints boxed, engines crated, mines relocated. Operation Paperclip ferries German engineers and crates of V2 parts to White Sands, New Mexico, where the desert looks like a paused ocean. You stand in that unblinking sun and watch a creature of war become a schoolteacher. On 24 October 1946, a V2 camera, bolted into a rough steel cradle, clicks through a narrow window. Its film returns a ghostly image of Earth from above 100 kilometers, the first photo from space. The planet curves like the shoulder of someone sleeping. You hold the print with trembling fingers, the emulsion smelling faintly of vinegar and miracle. Scientists, quiet, insistent, borrow the hardware and insert questions. What does the upper atmosphere feel like, electrically and chemically? What is the shape of cosmic rays? In the nose cones ride thermometers, Geiger counters, cloud seeds of curiosity wrapped in foil. The rockets rise, sometimes clean, sometimes ashamed, and the desert records each lesson with wind. One climbs and breaks apart, scattering instruments across the gypsum like seeds. Another returns a strip of film, where a cloud looks like a whispered lie. Progress is a conversation full of stutters. At White Sands you hear different thunder than Peenemunde's. It is the sound of a thing changing purpose, the moral pitch bending towards study. The launch crew mutters in a mix of languages. Someone makes a joke about cooking breakfast on the engine bell, and the laughter is welcome, thin but real. You taste dust. You watch a tumbleweed roll against a fence. You feel the launch count gather in your chest like a second heartbeat. 7, 6, says a voice that refuses to rush. Patience is the only fuel that never runs out. Across the ocean, in the Soviet steppe, trains deliver captured parts and captured expertise to sites inked off the maps. In barracks hung with the damp of human breath, engineers redraw every pipe and flange so that dependence becomes understanding. Korolev returned to work, sketches a path from battlefield missiles to something that could loft instruments into a circle. He thinks in clusters, engines in bunches, thrust shared, failure contained. In winter, frost grows on the inside of window panes. In summer, mosquitoes stitch the air. Above the tables, lamps buzz with a fly's persistence. The lesson of war is clear to him. Range and reliability are the two keys that open every door beyond weather. You climb a steel gantry somewhere nameless and touch the flaking paint. Your palm comes away red, as if the machine has a pulse. The bell of a test engine sits quiet and dark, its throat coked with char, its edges nicked like a boxer's brow. Scar tissue. Mechanics pin chalkboards with failure charts. Combustion instability, pump cavitation, nozzle erosion, guidance drift. Each scribble is a story. Here a valve stuck. Here a flame went hungry. and tore the chamber apart to feed itself. Out of these scars grows a discipline. Baffles, injectors with patterns like lace, turbines that drink peroxide without complaint. Pain, meeting attention, becomes wisdom. You pass through a hangar where a spent missile lies on trestles, its skin peeled back to show ribs and sinew. A man taps an oxygen line with a wrench and listens as if for a baby's cough. Another squints at a gyroscope's hum, the pitch just slightly wrong. Everywhere the senses are, apprentices' eyes to gauge flame color, ears to hear, pump rhythm, noses to sniff a leak before it finds a spark. This is not romance, this is craft. And yet, in a quiet corner, a young engineer draws a circle around Earth on scrap paper, adding a tiny rectangle that will someday carry a voice. He tucks the scrap into his pocket like a charm. In the United States, the Redstone and then the Jupiter family rise from V, 2 bones. In the Soviet Union, R1 becomes R2, then R5, then the sprawling R7, each step a taller letter, learning to spell its own name. The numbers look tidy on briefing slides, but the air remembers the noise, the heat, the mistakes. Range tests arc over Kazakh grassland, stages thud into the ocean beyond Cape Canaveral's sand. Pelicans lift in slow alarm, a truck full of hard hats rattles by, and the men inside swallow their fear with coffee gone sour on the burner. Every light begins as someone's stubborn idea, you say again, and now you add, stubbornness learns quickest when the stakes are mortal. The unintended teachers keep teaching. War's budget built the laboratories. War's urgency accelerated the math. War's shame compels the conversion. If we can throw weight across continents, can we not also place small, listening hearts into the sky? You stand in a control blockhouse with cinder block walls thick as a secret, and you watch a needle shiver as liquid oxygen chills the feed line. Frost blossoms around the flange like a white flower blooming too fast. A young woman at the console rubs warmth into her fingertips and whispers a countdown to calm herself. You hear the word go, pass down the line, a relay of trust. And then again the roar, the peal of flame, the animal body of a rocket rising on legs made of fire. But you know now to watch the exhaust for flicker, to watch the roll for a tremor, to watch the ascent for the graceful S-curve that marks a brain guiding a bellow. When it works, the silence afterward is different. It is an attentive quiet, as if the sky has leaned in to ask, what next? You step back from the pads, from the dunes, from the factories, and you hold 2 truths at once. The engines were born in a dark hour, and they carried us toward a clearer one. They are scarred teachers, stern but fair, who gave us the grammar of ascent, thrust minus weight, delta V, staging like shedding old doubts, and then, almost against their nature, allowed us to repurpose that grammar for curiosity. Somewhere in a drawer, beside a stopwatch and a box of O-rings, lies a palm-sized photo of Earth's rim, taken by a war rocket on a peaceful errand. The curve looks shy, as if embarrassed by the violence that revealed it. You breathe out. The desert wind carries the last of the exhaust away and replaces it with the smell of creosote and sun-warmed wire. The concrete is warm under your hand. A lark sings like a cheap whistle. The lesson settles. Tools do not choose their first jobs, but people can choose their next ones. And so the bruised engines, the ones that learned how to climb while the world burned, have quietly drafted the syllabus for the next chapter, the one where circles around the night become possible, and the beeping proof will be small enough to ride beneath your eyelids. You stand in a wind that tastes like tin and frost, somewhere on the Kazakh steppe that maps pretend not to know a place labelled Tyuratam, later dressed with the friendlier name Baikonur. The night of 4 October 1957 is sharp enough to carve your breath into slices. Floodlights bleach the skin of a slender booster, its clustered engines sleeping with their mouths open. Men in quilted jackets speak in quick, clipped syllables that fog and vanish. The war-forged grammar has become a lullaby for a new purpose. Out there in the dark, a polished sphere waits under its shroud, patient as an egg. Inside a small blockhouse, a clock's second hand taps like a woodpecker. Sergei Korolev, the chief designer to most, a man without a public face, leans over a console with an expression you recognize from every workshop we've visited, attention sharpened into kindness. He knows the checklist like a poem. Propellant, load complete. Telemetry live. Guidance primed. On the pad, the R7 booster exhales. Pale clouds. As liquid oxygen boils slow and ghostly, you smell metal chilled beyond comfort, a sterile sweetness of cryogen, the faint rubber tang of gaskets holding their breath. The earth is so quiet that even your heartbeat sounds like a sabotage. A cap pops free, a cable snakes loose. And then, ignition first a cough, then a steadier growl, then the full-bodied roar of kerosene and oxygen finding their dance. 4 strap-on boosters and a core stage learn to agree. The flame is not red, but the clean color of heat itself, washing the pad with a daylight that has no sun. Concrete trembles. You feel the sound through your shoes, a percussion that climbs your bones to your jaw. The vehicle rises, straight and scandalously confident, laddering itself into the black with a white ribbon of exhaust. In the control room, someone mutters, "Pusk," and someone else answers, "Yest," and the ritual of ascent becomes real. Stages separate, like old skins let go without regret. Telemetry murmurs about pressures and temperatures, and a heartbeat that is not a heart. The third stage lights where air is mostly memory, pushing the payload toward a curve that closes on itself. You picture the teacher in Kaluga and the desert engines, and it feels as if the night is nodding yes to all of them. A thought that began beside a candle now writes its name with fire so high the flame forgets to flicker. Cut off. Silence. 1,000 kilometers beneath, the steppe receives the quiet, like a blessing. Above, a small mirrored world wakes in weightlessness, a sphere 58 centimeters across. 4 whip antennas flaring backward like the tail feathers of a metallic bird. Its mass is 83.6 kilograms, its skin a thin armor of polished aluminum, its heart 2 radio transmitters set to 20.005 and 40.002 megahertz. No camera, no brain as we would call it, just a voice and a stubborn orbit. You listen in your mind for what's next, and the universe answers with a syllable so simple it feels like a child's first word. Beep. Not a melody, not a message, just a tidy pulse shaped by temperature and pressure in a little pressurized chamber, a battery-fed heartbeat that plans to last 21 days. The sound slides through the dark like a pebble in a pond, touching every shore in turn. Ground stations in Kamchatka catch it first. Then, as Earth turns, others do. Jodrell Bank in England, a garage full of radio amateurs in New Jersey, a basement in Tokyo, where someone forgot to turn the light on because the sound felt brighter. Antennas tilt like sunflowers. People who don't believe in miracles stand perfectly still. Newspapers will scream tomorrow, but tonight the noise is small enough to fit in your ear. You close your eyes and hear how clean it is, how certain. Machine certainty can be terrifying. Tonight, it is soothing, like a lighthouse, keeping time for ships that have not yet learned they are lost. Every light begins as someone's stubborn idea, you murmur, and listen as the idea becomes a metronome for the world. Tick for fear, tock for wonder. Facts cling to the sound like dew. The orbit is an ellipse, perigee about 215 kilometers, apogee near 939, a period close to 96 minutes. The sphere crosses the night from northwest to southeast, sometimes bright enough to be mistaken for a slow star. You step outside, and the cold punches your lungs. Somewhere beyond cloud, a point of light slides with impeccable manners, silent as a skater on black ice. Dogs don't bark at it, owls don't change their minds. Only humans gasp, and then they go quiet, because the beeping on the radio makes all other commentary rude. In kitchens from Moscow to Milwaukee, people set plates aside and lean over cabinet-sized receivers, the vacuum tubes inside warming the room like small toasters. A father explains to a daughter that the pitch drops slightly when the little world flies away because of something called Doppler. She hears it. Her eyes widen. Somewhere, a science teacher sleeps badly because he knows Monday's lesson plan just became inadequate. Somewhere else, a senator writes the word education with a force that tears the paper. A boy on a Nebraska farm tries a bent coat hanger as an antenna, and it works, and he will never again believe the sky is far. Fear arrives dressed as ore and sits down beside it. The United States counts the arc against the map and thinks of missiles more than music. The Soviets listen too, and hear confirmation that their ladder can reach the attic of the world. The steppe wind keeps blowing, indifferent as always. You rub your palms together for warmth and realize the night has changed species. Before, it was habitat. Now it is architecture. We have put a small bell in the rafters and set it ringing. Back on the pad, the gantry stands empty, blackened in tasteful streaks, smelling of cooked paint and blown dust. A crewman stoops to pick up a square of frost that has fallen from a line and holds it until it evaporates from his glove, leaving a damp ghost. He doesn't smile. He whistles the beeps under his breath without knowing it. In a room nearby, a teletype clatters out a line that will make history telegraph short. Object is observed on the calculated path. It sounds almost bored, which is how truth talks when it knows it is permanent. You picture oceans rolling under the little sphere. Over the Pacific, fishermen look up from their nets. Over Africa, a child hears a crystal-set whisper. Over Paris, a woman smoking at the window imagines a silver pearl threading the sky like a needle. The beeps keep time with her ash. No one understands the whole of it yet, but everyone senses the partition lifting between the human and the cosmic. Great changes often begin with a small, repetitive sound. A pick on rock, a clock in a sick room, a heart inside a chest. Tonight it is a radio's shy syllable travelling at the speed of thought. 3 weeks later, the batteries will sigh and the voice will fade, leaving only the mute glide of a cold worldlet that still circles until the 4th of January 1958, when heat will reclaim it in a streak you could mistake for a shooting star and make a wish on without knowing what you are touching. But you don't rush there. You stay in the early nights, bundled and grateful, listening as if to a relative in the next room, a newborn practicing the one sound it knows. Every orbit, you reflect, is a promise to try again. The sky keeps that promise by simply being patient. Inside your coat, your own pulse steadies to match. You think of that candle in Kaluga, and of engines that learned decency after war, and of the math that drew a circle and then asked the universe politely to fill it. Somewhere, far above a sleeping field, 4 antennas comb empty space and find again and again the courage to say hello, and you stand in the frost and whisper back. Not with words, but with the quiet faith that listening is its own kind of answer. You step out into an October night that smells like damp leaves and coal smoke, and the world feels newly hinged. On porches and rooftops, in schoolyards and on the decks of ships, people tilt their heads the same way sunflowers do, except there's no sun, only a faint, obedient dot sliding along a line no one has ever traced before. Radios murmur indoors, crickets argue outdoors. Somewhere a dog quits barking mid-syllable, as if the sky just told it a secret. You find your breath and let it fog and vanish. Above you, a point moves with the confidence of a sentence already written. The newspaper's printed times. Tonight's pass will cut from the northwest toward the southeast, about 6 handspans above the horizon if you squint. Jodrell Banks' brand new radio telescope in Cheshire, England, still smelling of paint and rain, has turned its metal ear toward that wandering bead of light, and Bernhard Lovell's team listens for reflections of radar on a thing the size of a medicine ball. In Cambridge, Massachusetts, the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory has marshaled teams of volunteers for Project Moonwatch, kids and professors alike, wrapped in scarves and earnestness, pencils ready to mark what the night decides to say. You join them in spirit, standing under a tangle of telephone wires that now look like staff lines waiting for a note. Beep, a radio whispers from an open window. Beep, answers another down the street. The sound is thin as a pin, yet it stitches neighborhoods into a single listening body. A father lifts his son onto a car hood, still warm from the ride. A librarian bites her lip to stop it from trembling. An amateur astronomer, snug behind a backyard fence, tightens the thumbscrew on a theodolite and erases a smudge with his sleeve. You recognize the hum in the air. Not fear, not quite. Anticipation tuned to wonder. Every light begins as someone's stubborn idea, you think, and sometimes the idea escapes the lab and learns to walk across people's faces. They're left of Vega, or maybe your fingers are shaking. Another minute and the dot steadies into your knowing. It is brighter than you expected, dimmer than a planet, steady as a clock. Airplanes blink, meteors flare and vanish. This point, this pilgrim, declines drama. It does not waver, it slides. You feel something in your ribs relax. A schoolteacher beside you, someone's Tsiolkovsky descended by temperament if not by name, whispers the period. About 96 minutes per lap. 2 orbits before midnight, 2 after. Like a neighbor who walks his dog on a schedule you will soon be able to predict. Down the block, a boy in a Cubs cap clutches a star chart printed on cheap paper. The chart's black ink rubs off on his thumb, but he doesn't notice. He points and calls to no one in particular. There. And suddenly 5 strangers are friends. On the grass, someone has chalked a big cross marking north and east. On a windowsill, a transistor radio, battery door held with tape, ticks out those famous syllables, 20.005 megahertz, a note so pure the air feels polished. A woman writes the time in a little notebook with a fountain pen that scratches like a cricket. You hear all these small sounds braided with the very large silence of space, and you feel the braid tug you forward into a different century. At Jodrell Bank, an oscilloscope trace shivers. The great bowl turns with theatrical slowness, its motors sighing, dew turning to glaze along its rim. A technician with cold ears checks the Doppler shift down a few cycles as the traveller recedes and calls the numbers to a student who writes them in a logbook someone will someday frame. In Washington, D.C., a night shift at the Naval Research Laboratory leans over a map and taps a pencil where the path should cross at 41 degrees north. In Moscow, a switchboard light blinks. The duty officer clears his throat and allows himself a small smile. The globe has become a single throat clearing, and still, the past remains a private thing between you and the sky. The dot climbs, pauses relative to your body's clumsy geography, then descends toward the horizon, as if it were bowing. Clouds snag it, release it. A plane intrudes with arrogant strobes. The newcomer, polite, ignores the show and continues. You think of the candle in Kaluga that threw only a little light, and how that little light contained a geometry large enough to change weather and maps. Wonder grows slowly, and then all at once. Tonight you feel the all at once. Facts. Keep your feet on the ground. Launch was at 7:28 p.m. Moscow time on the 4th of October 1957. The beacons alternate so that when one rests, the other sings. The orbit's perigee has shaved a little lower over the past week, the atmosphere exacting its toll. None of it makes the sensation less dreamlike. You hear a freight train pass beyond the trees. The iron-on-iron shriek, a reminder that technology once meant sparks and grit, and men with lanterns. Now the lantern has been hung higher, and it hums in your radio with the modesty of a metronome. Project Moonwatch stations report in. In Arizona, college students at a tennis court count and call. In Peru, the sky is squeaky clean, the Milky Way a white spill. In France, a cafe spills light onto cobblestones while patrons pretend not to care, then care very much when someone points up. Telephones ring, teletype machines chatter. A clerk in a linoleum-floored office eats a cold apple between messages and leaves the core in a paper cup, because nothing feels normal enough to throw away just yet. History is often clerical before it is poetic. At home, living rooms rearrange themselves around consoles. The cabinet radios glow amber, tubes making a civilized warmth in the dark. A mother says, "Listen," and the room obeys. A teenager scribbles the word Sputnik on a notebook and draws 4 whiskers like eyelashes. The doodle will later grow into a degree in electrical engineering, but tonight it is just a sketch with the electricity of a crush. In the back seat of a parked car, a courting couple forgets to kiss for a whole minute because the heavens have just demonstrated a different kind of intimacy, Earth and its tiny moonlit in slow, strict embrace. And you, breath a little shallow, shoulders a little hunched because the air has teeth, feel the presence of that first spark we saw, the pen scraping in Kaluga, translated now into motion anyone can see. The democratization of wonder, you could call it. No ticket, no invitation. Only the schedule printed in a newspaper and the patience to look up. Every orbit, you murmur, is an invitation to humility. The dot is not coming for you. It is not avoiding you. It is indifferent in the most generous way. It teaches you to find comfort in not being the center. The pass ends. The dot slides into the wool of the horizon and unthreads itself. Radios keep beeping a few moments longer, then quiet like wind-down toys. People clap without meaning to, a soft domestic applause. Someone mutters, "My God." Someone else says, again, at 9:32. The street resumes being a street. A bicycle ticks as its wheel cools. You tuck your hands into your sleeves, and you stand there another minute in case astonishment has an afterglow you might miss if you move too soon. In a few weeks, a second sphere will sing even louder. In December, an American attempt will rise a few feet and fall in a televised blush that newspapers will nickname with schoolyard cruelty. Soon, orbital mechanics will be conversation at bus stops. Soon, classrooms will add new chapters. Soon, governments will pour money into labs that smell of solder and chalk, dust and ambition. But tonight is simpler. Tonight is the first time you chased a moving punctuation mark across the page of the night and felt the grammar of the world change. You walk home slowly. The power lines hum. An upstairs neighbour coughs. A kitchen light clicks off somewhere. The night seems larger, but not colder. Inside, you set your radio on the windowsill and leave it tuned low, a heartbeat for the bedroom. You write the time of the next pass on a scrap of paper and tape it to the glass. Sleep will come easy, you think, not in spite of the news, but because of it. Sometimes, reassurance is not a promise that nothing will change, but a demonstration that change can be patient and precise. At the edge of sleep, you picture the dot again, this time moving over oceans and deserts you will never see in person. Fishermen, shepherds, night guards in silent factories. A nurse stepping outside between rounds to cool her thoughts. All of them briefly standing under the same moving star, united not by fear but by the simple act of looking up. Everything we build, you realize, becomes part of the choreography of attention. And tonight, the choreography is graceful. You sit at a workbench that smells like solder and winter coats, the kind of smell that clings to campuses in January. It is 1957, tipping into 1958, and you are in the basement labs at the University of Iowa, where James Van Allen's team coaxes a Geiger-Müller tube to behave. The cylinder is no bigger than a fountain pen, but it insists on having opinions about humidity, voltage, and pride. A student rubs rosin on a joint, another tightens a tiny screw until it squeaks. The International Geophysical Year, an 18-month promise to measure the planet with uncommon seriousness, has become a quiet drumbeat in these rooms. You run a finger along a bundle of wires that feel like tense violin strings, and listen to the counters click with a brittle insect patience. Knowledge, you remind yourself, is often just the practice of dignifying small sounds. In a corner, a chalkboard lists launch windows from Cape Canaveral, crisp numbers nested like birds' eggs. The payload is modest 30-odd pounds of electronics and hope, and yet it carries the audacity of a new question. What does the high sky taste like, electrically speaking? Van Allen's team tunes the tube to count charged particles, then argues over shielding thickness the way chefs argue about salt. You remember our first candlelit room and realize how the recipe has evolved. The flour is math, the water is fire, and the spice, always, is curiosity. The tube's faint ticks sound like a watch held to your ear, time converted into evidence. Night pours itself over Cape Canaveral, 31 January 1958, as if to make the stars easier to count. On Pad 26A, the Juno the First booster, really a Jupiter C with its secrets repurposed, waits in ocean air that tastes of rust and tide. You step into the blockhouse, the concrete thick enough to feel safe and also like a sermon about caution. A coffee cup leaves a ring on a clipboard at 10:48 p.m. Local time, ignition writes its impatient signature. A rapid thud that swells into a roar, cordite and kerosene braiding into a hot, peppery scent in the back of your throat. The vehicle climbs, staging like a magician who hates applause. One trick, then another, then silence where the trick was. Telemetry threads the room with calm numbers. Above the Atlantic, the payload wakes. Explorer 1, 13.9, 7 kilograms of instrumentation. A long, lean body with antennas folded like praying arms. Inside, the little counter starts its work, counting sparks made by invisible visitors. You imagine the tube as a tiny chapel bell, ringing whenever a charged particle chooses to confess. Orbits settle into habit, perigee around 358 kilometers, apogee near 2,550, period roughly 114.8 minutes. Acquisition, someone says, and the word feels like a net thrown upstream into the night. Over ground stations, the data comes home as pencil squiggles and clattering printer tape. The counts look sensible, busy, then restful, then busy again until they don't. At certain altitudes and latitudes, the instrument seems to go quiet, as if sulking. The line on the chart flattens to a smug horizon. A technician taps the pen with a fingernail. Another checks the supply voltage. Someone mutters about a loose connector. The room smells of warm dust and doubt. You hold your breath and remember that in Section 3 the universe answered with a beep. Here it answers with a pause that sounds like a mistake. But the silence is a kind of shout. The Geiger tube saturates, overwhelmed by more charged particles than it can count, turning abundance into apparent nothing. In Iowa, Van Allen and his team compare passes and realize the flat lines repeat in zones, as predictable as sunrise. In March 1958, Explorer 3 carries a tape recorder, an Ampex-built memory that whirs like a cat and returns clearer patterns. Belts of energetic particles trapped by Earth's magnetic field, invisible toruses girdling the planet like unadvertised armor. You exhale, slow, and feel your ribs loosen, the way they do when a puzzle's edges finally touch. A map blooms on a light table, paint scarred from 100 drafts. The belts swell over the poles, pinch near the equator, thicken where the magnetic field lines gather like a child's fist. Numbers become a picture becomes a place. We are nested, you think. Not alone, but held. Every light begins as someone's stubborn idea, you recall, and some ideas discover the dark we live inside and call it shelter. The facts steady the poetry. The inner belt, packed with protons accelerated by cosmic rays colliding with upper atmosphere, reaching down to about 1,000 kilometers. The outer belt, richer in electrons, drifting from roughly 13,000 out to tens of thousands of kilometers. Radiation doses there are not gentle. In those heights, film fogs, counts scream. Electronics grow erratic unless you treat them like temperamental musicians. Shield, tune, check, repeat. You hear an oscilloscope's green eyelid blink and blink, the room lit witchy and kind. Science, at its sweetest, is the careful conversion of surprise into procedure. News of the discovery lands like rain on roofs in many time zones. At the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, Van Allen stands at a podium in May 1958 and speaks in a voice that tries to keep the thunder modest. Above the words hovers the image. Double halos around Earth, a saint's icon turned empirical. In Moscow, Soviet scientists nod they've seen troubling counts from Sputnik 2 and will soon fly Sputnik 3 with a suite of instruments to map the same invisible weather. The room you stand in smells less like triumph than like fresh paper. Journals are being printed. You run a fingertip along a diagram and feel the ink ridge like dried lava. Engineers, practical souls, sharpen their pencils. Flight paths will need reconsideration. Manned capsules must avoid or minimize exposure. Components demand shielding no one budgeted for. At Cape Canaveral, someone chalks a new no-go region on a board and underlines it twice. In factories from Long Island to the Urals, technicians fit little lead skirts over vulnerable tubes, the way gardeners wrap saplings against frost. You touch a sheet of mu metal and feel its sullen heft, a physical promise to divert magnetic tantrums. Philosophy, kindly, notes that every boundary discovered is also a doorway framed. You step outside into a Florida dawn that smells of wet grass and hot aluminum. The air is already a broth. Above you, invisible belts hum with particles whipped by field lines that loop and dip like taut ribbons. Birds chatter as if reciting statistics. The ocean hisses. You close your eyes and try to hear the belts, to imagine their sound may be a high, dry whisper, like sand poured steadily into a jar. The sky, newly complicated, does not become less beautiful. Understanding often adds layers rather than weights. A week later, you are back in Iowa, leaning over a tape loop while the recorder's capstan presses steady as a heartbeat. Click, whir, click. The data is not glamorous, but it glows with the integrity of something that did what it said it would. Van Allen, sleeves rolled, traces a curve and smiles with the tired satisfaction of a carpenter running a palm over a well-planed board. There's structure, he says softly. The sentence feels like a benediction. We live inside a magnet's architecture, a cathedral not of stone but of field. The belts begin to creep into conversation in unexpected places. Airline planners think about polar routes. Telecommunication dreamers sketch paths that thread safer altitudes. Doctors already hovering at the edge of the project calculate tolerances for bodies that will ride higher soon. A journalist asks if this new radiation is dangerous. A scientist replies that danger depends on time and distance, the two weights on every scale we use. You picture that first beeping sphere and the tilted antennas from October nights, and realize the story has added a layer, not of fear, but of respect. We have found the invisible weather above weather. You set a hand on a model globe on the lab shelf, the kind with a satisfying wobble when spun. Your fingers brush the Atlantic, then the Amazon, then Kazakh grasslands you've smelled by moonlight. Somewhere up there, loops of trapped fireflies circle, obedient to lines your eyes cannot see. Down here, the Geiger tube ticks in a rhythm that feels less brittle now, as if the world and the instrument have learned to trust each other. Every discovery, you think, is a reminder that surprise is the partner of safety. The candle from Kaluga flickers in memory. The war rockets nod in gruff approval. The beeping sphere taps the glass of your attention like rain, and in the gentle clutter of the lab paper cups, a bent paperclip shaped like a fish, a sweater, someone forgot over a chair. You feel the sweetness of being held inside an unseen architecture that both warns and shelters. The belts do not love us. They are simply there. But simply there can be a kind of love when recognized. You turn off the recorder and the room exhales. Outside, the wind lifts a thin snow and lets it fall again, a white rehearsal for the particles that never touch ground. We are wrapped, you realize, and wrapping invites care. You arrive before dawn at a clearing in rural Maine, where the grass holds pearls of dew and the air tastes of pine and cold metal. A white flared horn rises from the field like a seashell left by a thoughtful giant Andover Earth station, built by Bell Labs, its smooth mouth angled toward a sky that still yawns with stars. Inside, clistrons purr, fans exhale, and waveguides, rectangular arteries the color of old coins, carry microwaves that no tongue can taste. A technician rubs his hands together and checks a panel with lights arranged like a small constellation. The room smells faintly of warm dust and ozone, the gentle incense of invention getting ready to speak. It is July 10, rolling into the 11th of July, 1962. Across the Atlantic, in Plumeur-Bodou, Brittany, a matching horn waits with its own patience, its steel ribs damp from sea air. The plan is simple enough to sound like magic. A spinning relay the size of a beach ball will wake, listen at one frequency, and immediately sing back at another, allowing continents to hear each other in the same breath. The little messenger was launched a few hours earlier from Cape Canaveral by a Thor Delta, rising on a pillar of fire you've learned to recognize as the language of ascent. Now it circles an inclined path about 45 degrees to the equator, an elongated ellipse that makes it a punctual visitor rather than a permanent fixture. Timing will be everything. Wonder, you realize, has a wristwatch. Telstar is its name, a word that tastes bright when you say it. Built by Bell Labs, wrapped in a mosaic of solar cells that glimmer like a scaled fish, it spins for stability about several revolutions per second, turning its body into a gyroscope that remembers where upright is, even when up is a suggestion. Inside, transistors the size of breadcrumbs rest behind radiation, shielding not yet wise to the new ferocity in the sky. Yesterday's high-altitude nuclear test, Starfish Prime, has sown artificial belts of high-energy electrons that will later bruise this tiny heart. But not yet. For now, the relay hums and the world leans closer. You stand beside the console as an engineer with calm hands adjusts a dial labeled in megacycles. The uplink will go up in the 6 GHz band, slide across the void as neatly as a skipped stone, and return on 4. The horn's smooth throat keeps stray noise from licking at the signal. Somewhere, far overhead, the spinning messenger's antenna pattern sweeps like a lighthouse beam, and if the beam and the horn kiss in the same instant, voices will learn to walk on air. Every light begins as someone's stubborn idea, you remember, and tonight the idea is that distance is a story we can edit. A tone goes out, crisp and mathematical. Silence answers, patient as ocean between coasts. Then, a grainy image on a monitor grays into focus. An American flag waving at Andover's lawn, stars and stripes rendered in pixels the size of thumbprints, as if stitched by a determined child. Across the sea, in Brittany, the same flag flutters. Then, from there, an image returns. The Eiffel Tower, skeletal and precise, a modernist lace. The engineers don't applaud, they breathe. Everyone knows the window is short. Only when Telstar climbs into view of both horns can the path close into a circuit. The sky has become a relay race, baton exchanged every few minutes. A voice joins the pictures, flat and clear as a chalk line. Hello, we are live words you feel in your chest because they carry more than meaning. They carry era. A presenter in New York speaks. A presenter in Paris answers. Translators scramble and grin. Somewhere a mother wakes a child, and somewhere a child wakes a mother. A baseball game blinks across the Atlantic. A shot of Niagara trades places with a ferry on the Seine. The sound is a little tinny, like a good pocket radio, and that slight imperfection makes it sweeter. Proof that the world is making do while it invents fluency. You listen with your whole face. The facts keep time. Telstar's first active tests and the first live transatlantic television and telephone relays occur on the 11th of July 1962, made possible by those great horns and a 77-kilogram sphere with a single-channel repeater that sips power as carefully as a monk. The orbit is about 158 minutes per lap. The useful window between Maine and Brittany stretches to 20 minutes, give or take, depending on geometry and grace. There's no geostationary seat yet. That patient circle will come later. For now, the relay is a visitor you must court with clocks and predictions. Precision becomes hospitality. You step outside for a breath, and the grass kisses your shoes with cold. The horn's white skin glows in first light. Birds stitch the air with short syllables. Inside, a teletype rattles out acknowledgements. Received at 1120 Z, signal quality good, Doppler nominal. Someone sets down a coffee that tastes like burnt hope and doesn't drink it. On the wall, a chalkboard holds a simple diagram. Earth, an oval path, two horns, arrows like whispers. You touch the chalk dust with a fingertip and leave a comet tail on the slate. Communication, you think, is the art of hammering meaning into waves and persuading the sky to carry them intact. In the afterglow, the mind unspools earlier attempts like a prelude that suddenly makes sense. 2 summers ago, Echo 1, a 30-meter mylar balloon, had bloomed like a silver moon and taught everyone the elegance of a passive shout. Bounce a signal off a mirror and catch it on the other side. It wasn't nimble, it was glorious. Even before that, in December 1958, a repurposed Atlas rocket had carried a project called SCORE that broadcast a recorded Christmas message from President Eisenhower, the first time a human voice rode a man-made star. Telstar gathers those experiments, knits them tighter, and adds a living ear and a living mouth. You feel the continuity like a pulse through the years. Inside Andover's hall, someone adjusts the polarizer. Someone else checks the noise temperature, which, charmingly, imagines a receiver as a body that can run a fever. The numbers behave. A tiny hiss on the monitor resolves into applause in France. A melody from a studio in London spills into a cafe in Quebec. The horn, essentially a beautifully behaved megaphone, sits with grave focus, a sculpture that has remembered it is an animal. You place your palm on its support strut and feel a faint shiver when a motor nudges the aim. Machines, too, seem to get stage fright. Philosophy arrives politely. What is a continent if a syllable can jump it in a blink? Borders are agreements about dirt. Messages are agreements about time. Tonight, the agreements favor closeness. You picture cables under the sea doing their braided work. You admire them still. But up here, the path is the color of nothing, and yet it holds everything. Faces, weather maps, emergency calls, a lullaby. A grandmother sings to a baby, seeing a distant father smile on a flickering screen. Every conversation, you murmur, is a bridge we build in the dark. Between passes, the room relaxes. A technician slides a drawer shut with the care one uses for a sleeping child. Another sketches an idea on a napkin. What if, instead of chasing a traveller, we placed a relay so high it would float in lockstep with Earth, always over the same sea? The thought is older than tonight, Arthur C. Clark wrote about such orbits in 1945, but here, amid cables and hum, the notion feels immediate, like a door that has been visible all along and will soon be tried. For now, you embrace the sprint. Window opens, hearts race, window closes, hands rest. You walk to the back of the room where a rack holds spare waveguide sections and couplers shaped like tidy puzzles. A faint warmth leaks from the hardware, the way a loaf of bread warms a kitchen. On a nearby stool lies a headset, its ear cushions smooth with human oil and time. You lift it and listen not to voices now, but to the noise itself, a soft, even rush, the sound of the universe making room. In that hush, you think of our earlier nights of a beeping jewel, of the belts that wrap us unseen, and it feels right that sound is the hero now. Sight dazzled us. Speech will organize us. Toward noon, another window opens. Telstar's little body, its solar tiles winking like scales, climbs into mutual view again. A new sequence. A phone call that leaps from an office in New York to a desk in London with no coil of copper in between. Only the whisker-thin touch of alignment. The caller laughs too loudly, the way humans do when they hear themselves somewhere impossible. Delay is a fraction of a heartbeat, meaning arrives intact. In Brittany, someone sets a hand over her mouth, not to stop words, but to steady the feeling that words are doing something beautiful. You exit into sunlight. The horn throws a clean shadow that looks like a question mark without a dot. The breeze carries resin from the pines and the far-off smell of cut hay. A truck rumbles past with new spools of cable, because even in the age of airpaths we still love lines you can touch. Overhead, the relay recedes, busy elsewhere. The world has not gotten smaller exactly. It has gotten closer, which is different and better. Closeness, you decide, is the geometry of kindness. Later, much later, the little spinner will suffer its transistors nibbled by the harsher radiation above, those man-made belts adding bite to the natural ones, and the voices will hitch, then falter. Engineers will nurse it back for a few proud minutes and then let it go, grateful. Other relays will follow, more robust, more patient, standing still over the equator like thoughtful moons. But the first time continents heard each other live through a star you built this morning in Maine, and Brittany remains a quiet sacrament. You can still feel the cool of the dew on your shoes, and the warmth of the waveguide under your palm. The horn rests. The room empties with the murmur of satisfied people, promising to return after lunch. You pause at the door and look back. The screens have gone to a grey that suggests rain. A single pilot light keeps vigil. You listen one more time to the low, even breath of the machines, and think of all the breaths, human and otherwise, that now can reach across oceans without first learning how to swim. Everything we build becomes part of how we speak to one another. And today, the sky learned a new word. Hello. You arrive at the edge of a Florida morning that smells like wet cord and sun-warmed tar, where gulls heckle the surf and Cape Canaveral's gantries sketch a forest of metal stems against a pale sky. The air has weight. Even your eyelids feel humid. Technicians in short sleeves sip coffee that tastes of tin and determination. On a cart glides a drum-bright cylinder the size of a small washing machine, its skin tiled with silver Tyros 1, television infrared observation satellite, a phrase that moves like a weather report learning to sing. It is the 1st of April 1960, not a joke at all. You place your palm near the cool body without touching, like greeting a baby whose name you already know will matter. Inside the drum, 2 television cameras rest under glass portholes, patient as owls. Magnetic coils for despin stabilize the spin, a trick like breathing through a straw. A star tracker will keep its eye honest. Tape recorders' little metal stomachs will store pictures for when the ground is ready to listen. Engineers check and recheck connectors, the way sailors touch knots before seas turn bossy. The room smells of flux and the soft sweetness of insulation warming under lamps. You can hear a fan make a round, even sigh. The rocket is a Thor able, the paint new enough to gleam. When ignition arrives, it's the usual language you've learned to read. A cough, a rise, a column of flame that looks solid until you try to touch it. Kerosene and liquid oxygen make thunder and citrus-smelling smoke. You hold yourself steady as the vehicle leans into wind, and then seems to remember a line written long ago, climbing briskly along it until the sky gives way. Stages separate like tactful dancers exchanging hands. Then the roar is far away, and a softer voice takes over. telemetry clicking like rain against a window. Orbit. The numbers say yes. Tyros-1 begins to turn about 12 revolutions each minute, like a thoughtful top. Panels catch a modest sun. Somewhere over the Atlantic, the first camera blinks awake as it crosses daylit cloud. In a New Jersey control room, banks of equipment hum with tube glow and deliberation. The first picture unspools on a monitor, lines crawling into being as if a pencil were shading Earth one slat at a time. You lean in. White swaths curl like cream poured into coffee. A coastline peaks like the edge of a letter. The ocean wears stippled grey where low clouds graze it with knuckles. You know clouds, but not like this. They have choreography now. A meteorologist with a tie too tight puts his hand on the console and forgets to move it. For years he has drawn fronts with blue teeth and red domes, educated guesses wearing the dignity of arrows. Now he sees a comma-shaped storm winding over New England, the spiral's tail hooked exactly where last night's speculation placed it, and also showing where his paper front is wrong. He swears softly, not at the mistake but at the kindness of being corrected. Every light begins as someone's stubborn idea. You remember. And here the idea is that looking beats guessing. The facts fall into place like quiet rain. Tyros-1 launches the 1st of April 1960. It weighs about 122 kilograms. It carries 2 Vidicon cameras that send back images with a resolution crude by the standards that will come but wholly by the standards that came before. The orbit sits around 700 kilometers, the period about 98 minutes. Ground stations at FT. Monmouth and Cayena Point listen. Tape recorders disgorge pictures when the satellite is within reach, then swallow new ones for the next pass. It is not continuous. It is enough to change the weather's voice from rumour to witness. You watch a technician tape photographs to a wall, a mosaic building hour by hour. The prints smell of vinegar and promise. The first storm bands look like lace laid over a continent. Fog appears as a pale smear over the Pacific's rim. The top of Florida looks like a thumbprint pressed into wet clay by a careless god. A forecaster runs a finger along a cloud edge and whispers something to himself that sounds like thank you. Out on a tarmac, a pilot who has flown by gut and scars studies the same picture and doesn't argue with it. Over the Gulf, lightning pops in a daytime anvil, light without thunder at this altitude, and you imagine the sound anyway, a rattle in the teeth of air. At night, those cameras grow blind. The lenses wait like eyes closed in trust. That limitation will nag. 4 years later, Nimbus 1 will rise in 1964 and teach the sky to be legible at midnight. Infrared radiometers turning heat into image night, a negative where warm cloud tops wear brightness like coronas. The path from first glance to fluent sight is short and steep. For now, daylight is a textbook rewritten every 90 minutes. In September 1961, Tyros-3 will stare at a spiral named Esther, the first time a hurricane is measured by a gaze that cannot be blinked away by rain. You picture the advisory desk buzzing with voices, coordinates updated with a confidence that feels like a new kind of mercy. Warnings go out earlier, ships decide differently. A fisherman mends a net under a porch roof and thinks of his sister inland, safer because a machine above swam through the weather to speak calmly about what it saw. Forecasts learn to whisper, and whispered truth is a balm. You step outside between passes, the Florida air like bathwater, dragonflies scribbling blue ink in the noon. Above you, invisible corridors carry the little drum from day into day. Back inside, the images accumulate, swirling cyclones, straight-edged cloud lines, thrown by jet streams you cannot see but can now infer. Snow cover creeping down a continent like lace being laid carefully for winter's dinner. The room's hum becomes companionable. Someone brings donuts. Someone writes, Tyros says, no, on a chalkboard as a joke, when a model predicts rain that the picture clearly refuses. Philosophy leans against the door jamb, unassuming. Weather has always been a story told by sky to land. Now the land answers from above, a conversation between eye and world that stretches the definition of both. To see is to become responsible, you think, and the thought sits softly but does not move. Pilots alter routes, farmers time harvests. Cities prepare salt and plows because a white scrawl announced itself from orbit with time to spare. Compassion hides inside competence. By 1966, ATS-1 will settle in a geostationary seat and return a teacher's dream. A full disk Earth, cloud motions in near real time like breath across a sleeping face. The first of the GOES series will follow in 1975, patient guardians parked above the equator, their sensors watching storms spin up in the Gulf and roll ashore with names and tempers. Across the Atlantic, Meteosat will join in 1977. Over the Pacific, GMS, and later Himawari, will watch the typhoons write calligraphy across warm water. You don't jump there yet. You let the drum do its first work, the culture shift of seeing. A print thumps out with a storm curled like a seashell over the Carolinas. You remember that horn in Maine we stood under, the one that taught continents to trade voices, and realize these two strands are now braiding. Speak and see and speak. A broadcaster holds up a fresh satellite image on the evening news, the paper still curling with damp, and a million living rooms lean forward. Weather stops being a rumor told by a smiling guesser and becomes a window everyone can look through together. Children trace the spiral with crayons. A sailor on third shift in Norfolk ties his boots a little tighter. In the lab, a forecaster taps a pen against his teeth and says, "Look at that dry slot," tasting the phrase like new candy. A professor mutters, "baroclinic leaf," with the reverence of a botanist who just found a rare fern. But jargon doesn't get the last word. The real word is care. In June, a line of storms rips out across the plains. Satellite pictures show the anvils fusing like a city waking. Sirens go earlier. Basements fill with radios and quilts. The smell of wet cement and canned peaches mixes with fear and with a quiet gratitude that the sky sent a postcard in time. You step to the window. Afternoon rain smudges the view, a grey curtain pulled almost politely. On your desk lies a glossy still of Earth's shoulder, cloud wrapped in its favourite shawl. Remember that first spark we saw in Kaluga? You tell yourself the courage of an equation beside a candle. Remember the engines that learned decency after war, the beeps that taught us to listen, the belts that warned us we are held inside a magnet's care, the horn that said hello across oceans. All of that now helps us look kindly at clouds from above, not to dominate them but to understand when to step aside. Back at the console, the next pass begins. The camera inhales and exhales a picture. Clouds slide like dancers following marks on a stage. Motions too big to see from below now made intimate. The tape recorder ticks, a cricket in a warm drawer. You rest your fingers on the console's edge and feel the faint vibration of gears and currents and choices. Every forecast, you whisper, is a promise to meet tomorrow with humility. The screen glows. The room listens. The weather, our oldest conversation partner, leans closer and, for once, speaks slowly enough to be understood. You stand in a Nevada desert where the sun makes the dust taste like warm pennies and a white dish the size of a swimming pool turns its heavy cheek with the grace of a ballet dancer. The motors hum like cats. The gearbox clicks once, satisfied. On a clipboard, someone has written a single number in thick pencil. 35,786. That is the height kilometers above the equator, where a circle becomes patient enough to match Earth's spin. A ring that doesn't move if you choose your seat just right. You lift your eyes to a blue that looks empty, and isn't. Years earlier, 1945, Arthur C. Clarke sat at a desk and wrote a quiet idea into a magazine. 3 radio relays parked high above the equator, spaced like steady lanterns, could carry the world's voices without chasing the horizon. His math was kind, practical, almost domestic in tone. A sidereal day of 23 hours, 56 minutes, 4 seconds. An orbit whose period equals that day. An altitude that turns falling into forever. Every light begins as someone's stubborn idea, and sometimes the idea waits 2 decades for metal to catch up. Now, in 1963, metal is on time. In July, a small drum named Syncom-2, born at Hughes under the stubborn care of Harold Rosen and his crew, finds an inclined geosynchronous path and proves a point with the calm of good engineering. The following year, Syncom-3, parked above the Pacific, lets a television signal walk from Tokyo to the United States so families can watch the 1964 Olympic Games live. The pictures are soft, like chalk through gauze, but they arrive while hearts are still beating from the race, and the miracle is not the sharpness, but the simultaneity. Distance, size, and steps aside. You put your hand on the rail around the dish and feel a tremor as the feed horn nods. The air smells of hot paint and sage. In a blockhouse, an operator wearing a short-sleeve shirt with a plastic pocket protector speaks into a headset, voice low, as if the sky could startle. He reads out a longitude, over the Pacific, near 180 west, and the dish obeys, settling its attention on a point that is, for the first time in history, obedient to staying put. You think of the sprint we ran with Telstar's brief windows, of the horns in Maine and Brittany racing the clock. Here, the clock has been asked nicely to take a chair. Then the 6th of April 1965 arrives, and with it a modest cylinder called Intelsat I, nicknamed Early Bird, takes its place over the Atlantic near 28 degrees west. First commercial bird in that patient ring, small enough to ride in the crook of two arms, strong enough to braid continents together. It can carry about 240 telephone circuits, or a single television channel. Calls across the ocean shed a layer of delay. Businessmen clear their throats less. Grandmothers hear the quiver in a far child's hello while the tea is still hot. A topology of tenderness appears, traced in microwaves. Inside the station, the spectrum analyzer paints thin green waterfalls. The uplink breathes at 6 gigahertz. The downlink returns at 4. A conversation that never crosses its wires. Outside, heat shivers above the desert like invisible silk. The dish moves again, so slowly it looks like thinking. You listen to relays click, to air conditioners sending their white noise into the room, to a printer chattering timestamps that turn event into record. The far-off relay does not care about your weather. It only cares about geometry, and geometry, when treated gently, pays back with reliability. The elegance of the ring is not just that the partner stays over the same patch of ocean or jungle, it's that antennas on rooftops can stop acting like hunters. They become furniture. A bowl on a hotel, a saucer on a news van, a tidy white cap on a school. In 1966, ATS-1 will go high and show a full-disk Earth to weather watchers, and by 1975, GOES will make that gaze routine above the Americas. In 1977, Meteosat will take the same patient stance over Europe and Africa. But before the alphabet soup, the habit forms. Point east by southeast. Lock to a longitude. Tighten the bolts. Add paint where the sun is cruel. You can feel culture change in these motors. Television learns to be global in one breath instead of two. Live concerts cross the Atlantic. Astronauts speak from orbit to classrooms that smell of chalk and winter coats. An emergency in one hemisphere borrows eyes and ears from the other. And under the glamour, the ordinary gets kinder. A doctor in Boston consults with a surgeon in Lyon. A ship's call routes without bouncing off the ionosphere like a coin off a stubborn table. A fisherman in the Azores asks for weather and hears truth instead of rumor. Connectivity, you think, is how compassion scales. Facts keep their gentle beat. The ring sits over the equator, so ground stations at mid-latitudes tip their dishes south. The path is a circle in space, but a single longitude on a map slot. Numbers and filings begin to matter, as nations request their addresses in the sky. Bodies like Intelsat, born in 1964 as an international consortium, negotiate not just with physics but with people. Overcrowded longitudes say, the busy Atlantic arc, careful spacing by fractions of a degree, keeps voices from stepping on each other's toes. The ring is quiet, theatre seating. The ushers are patient and firm. At dusk, the station's lights come on with a warm click, and moths begin their soft collisions with the windows. In the control room, a wall map glows with tiny bulbs marking orbital positions, a necklace at roughly equal distances. Over the Americas, the Atlantic, Africa, the Indian Ocean, the Western Pacific, each gem labelled with a name that sounds like a promise. Early Bird, Atlantic Bird, Intelsat 4, Palapa, Insat, Anik. You catch your reflection in the glass and look briefly like a navigator, though your only instrument is attention. You step outside with a coil of cable over your shoulder just to feel useful. The desert night smells like creosote, its peppery sweetness rinsing the heat from your mind. Above the southern horizon, if your city is quiet enough, you could point to a spot and say, right there, Someone is talking to someone. No motion betrays it. The star sits low, unseen. But your ear can imagine the surf of bits, the hiss that isn't noise but a crowd whispered into order. Remember that first spark we saw by candlelight, the teacher in Kaluga, sketching a circle around Earth and writing period in ink. Remember the bruised engines we met in war's shadow, taught to climb and then to serve. Remember the beeps that organized wonder, the belts that taught respect, the humming horn that proved a syllable could bridge a sea. The ring that doesn't move is all these lessons stabilized. Our desire for closeness turned into a habit that lets the world keep time with itself. Operators learn to expect these tantrums and plan around them, like living with a beloved elder who needs a blanket at certain hours. Habit breeds patience as well as convenience. A teletype in the corner spits out a schedule, a live news feed from Lagos, a phone patch to a research camp in Antarctica, a pop concert shared with a ship farther west than the sun. You run your hand along the console's edge and feel the faint buzz of fans and rectifiers, the heartbeat of a building designed for attention. Inside the distant cylinder, solar panels sip light. Gyros whisper their stubborn truths. A transponder, no bigger than a suitcase, keeps count of signals like a librarian with excellent posture. When you finally walk away from the desert dish, the horizon is violet, and the first stars offer themselves. You know most of them are not stars at all, but your body still greets them as if ancient. That's all right. The ring you're thinking of is not for eyes, it's for ears and minds and lives. Stillness in service of motion, you say to yourself, and the phrase sits down beside your breath and doesn't leave. In the distance, the dish makes one last, nearly imperceptible correction. The motors purr. The world, for a moment, feels synchronized. You enter a room that smells of dusted velvet and vinegar, the ghost of acetic acid rising from celluloid, while a projector mutters at the edge of hearing. Light threads the darkness and lays a pale river across a table where metal rulers, grease pencils, and stereoscopes wait like surgical instruments. No music, no voices, just the soft carousel clack of frames advancing and the hush of tired air. On the screen, a river in Kazakhstan grips its banks like someone holding a breath. A rail yard arranges itself into neat hieroglyphs. A long concrete strip points like a dare. You are inside a quiet cathedral, where secrets are read by light. The year is 1960. 2 summers have passed since the first beeps stitched attention across night skies. And a spring has passed since a U2 Francis Gary Powers's fell from May 1's thin air and turned diplomacy into a bruise that wouldn't fade. You stand now beside engineers and analysts who have bet their careers on a new bargain with gravity. Launch a camera so high it learns to forget clouds. Let it drink the world onto film, then teach the film to fall home in a small capsule, a gift thrown from the roof of the sky. The code name wears an ordinary face, Discoverer, so that press releases can smile. Inside the smiles lives Corona. The mechanics are domestic and outrageous at once. A drum of film as wide as your palm, hundreds of meters long, threads through a camera whose mirrors fold distance like origami. The shutter blinks quicker than a heart. The world's skin resolves to grains of silver, each a polite witness that never raises its voice. A tiny furnace keeps the optics from fogging. A fractional tug of spin stabilizes the gaze. You lay a fingertip on a sample strip and feel history as a slickness. Every light begins as someone's stubborn idea, you recall, and here the idea insists that seeing coldly can warm the century. Launches come in a nervous parade from Vandenberg's fog-frayed coast. On early tries, film tears like pride. Capsules miss their cue, orbits sulk. But on the 18th of August 1960, the capsule from Discoverer 14 Corona's first full success re-enters over the Pacific like a glowing bead. Its parachute blooms, a white flower in blue air. You watch through binoculars from a deck sticky with salt, while a JC-130 Hercules banks, a hook drooping from its tail like a fisherman's improbable dream. At the last moment, canvas and line meet. The hook bites. A cheer lifts ragged and low, and then grows. The bucket swings, the crew hauls, and the Pacific keeps its secret. The smell of jet fuel and sun-warmed rope climbs into your throat. Back in the room of vinegar light, the first rolls unspool. The grain is larger than romance, smaller than skepticism meters. Not centimeters, but the breadth is astonishing. Swaths of Eurasia, lattices of roads, long scars of test ranges. Analysts slide stereoscopic viewers over their eyes, and the flat world humps into relief. You learn to see shadows as rulers, tracks as intentions, scaffolds as calendars. A line of railcars at a factory says something about production. A fresh apron at a launch site says something about ambition. A new culvert feeding a reservoir says something about a city being asked to grow. Patterns, you think, are the soul speaking without knowing it. Facts steady the oar. By 1962, the program's KH1 and KH2 cameras give way to improved KH3 and KH4. Resolution sharpens from broad neighborhood to narrow street, roughly a few meters shrinking toward 2. Film capsules multiply. Later birds throw more than one bucket, each return an exhale of risk. Across the ocean, Soviet Zenit craft tug down their own sealed canisters, recovered on snowfields with the frank practicality of a country that respects winter. Rival eyes teach both sides to hold their breath and measure before shouting. You lean close to a montage, Baikonur's pads as they fatten and split, shipyards near Severodvinsk, a long, quiet road angling toward a fenced field where something tall is learning to stand. In October 1962, U-2 images will ignite headlines for 13 days over Cuba. But in the months that follow, Corona's look returns with context. Construction rates, missile field rhythms, the absence of surprise, where surprise would be loudest. Verification, a word that feels like a handshake, takes a seat at the table. Trust, you remind yourself, is not the opposite of checking. Trust is what checking allows. The projector coughs, the frame stutters, then a new run begins. A river delta in Vietnam looks like a hand spread flat on a steamed table. The Alps scratch the film with bright knuckles. A desert test site glows faintly, where metallic skeletons blush in infrared. Somewhere a pen scratches in the dark as a man logs coordinates by the small green of a desk lamp. Coffee smells bitter and charitable. You learn the grammar of reading from above. Long shadows in late passes, noon frames good for measuring, dawn and dusk useful for secrecy. You listen to the tick of a wall clock and feel how quickly this patient work gathers weight. Phone calls change tone. A negotiation across a table in Geneva gains a new texture. Heads of state do not need to trust each other's faces if both can trust their own eyes. Salt will come later, and other alphabets, ABM, INF, will borrow this calm witness. For now, the very existence of images that both can make quietly begins to pull teeth from fear. You think of that first beeping sphere, how it organized wonder. This eye organizes restraint. Seeing, you whisper, is how power learns manners. Oh so, the camera bodies evolve the way creatures do when a habitat rewards caution. Gambit will climb with longer focal lengths, hungry for finer detail. Hexagon will fly as a barn-sized bus, stuffed with film and hope, sending home multiple parachutes with the laziness of a generous tree in fruit. A rumor circulates about a bucket lost to the Pacific because a parachute-tangled systems are honest when you listen long enough. On a wall, a chart grows bougainvillea of red stickers marking recoveries, yellow for anomalies. No one says failure, they say lesson, because lessons are permitted to remain in the room. One afternoon, a capsule lands by mistake on Utah dirt, and a rancher touches history with a weathered hand before the Air Force arrives, polite and tight-smiled. Another day, an aircraft crew claws a parachute basket from a squall line that wrings their shirts in minutes and paints their cheeks with salt. The mid-air snag looks ridiculous until it works. Then it looks like culture, humans, catching their own gaze, falling out of heaven. The hook drips. The crew laughs, the laugh of muscles used well. The secrecy is thick and oddly tender. You watch technicians sign the underside of a camera panel with pencil, initials and triangles, and dates like graffiti in a cave. We were here. We made this. You want to say their names aloud, but the room teaches you to hum instead. A woman in a cardigan checks film for scratches with a magnifier that looks like a tiny well. She hums too. The projector resumes its river. On the screen, a forest in Siberia displays parallel clearings like missing teeth, new roads, new cuts. A freighter track parts the ice. Clues, everywhere, as polite as breadcrumbs. In February 1995, much later, a president will sign a paper, and a vault will breathe out 35 years of hidden weather. Corona, declassified. In offices that smell like fresh cardboard and old glue, historians and cartographers will weep quietly, not at the intrigue but at the maps. Glaciers in the Pamirs as they were, deltas before dams, deserts before drills. Archaeologists will discover buried cities by comparing then to now. Arms control historians will fill footnotes with dates that once would have required winks. You will hold a glossy print and feel both the electricity of secrets ending and the comprehension that secrets done well can serve peace. You sit back as the projector's lamp dims. In the screen's afterglow, dust performs a slow ballet you had not noticed until now. Remember the ring that doesn't move, the horns that traded hello, the drums that taught clouds to speak, the belts that offered their unseen warning. This chapter is colder in tone, warmer in consequence. The silent cameras didn't invite applause, they made room for agreements. Every picture, you think, is a sentence that can end with mercy. On the table, a stereoscope waits for your eyes. You lift it and lean over paired frames of a distant airfield, and the runway rises from flatness like a calm tide. Your breath fogs the lenses for a heartbeat. The world goes soft, then it returns. Outside, somewhere over an ocean, a small capsule falls through blue with its parachute round and patient, like a moon that has remembered gravity. A plane turns, a hook descends, and an unassuming bucket of silver crystals comes home to say, softly, that knowledge once processed, dried, and read can be kinder than fear. You stand on a night deck that smells of diesel and salt, and the sea wears a thin pewter sheen under a moon that pretends to be helpful. The compass points steadier than your nerves. The horizon is a rumour. The wind keeps its own counsel. Somewhere out there is land, and somewhere between here and land is a reef that does not care about your charts. On the radio, static tastes like tin. You close your eyes and wish the sky would speak in numbers you can trust. And then, faint as a far bell, it does. Long before this deck, in the early 1960 seconds, the U.S. Navy discovered a trick disguised as patience. Transit, the first operational system, noticed that as a known traveller crossed the sky, its radio tone slid up and down because of Doppler shift. Listen for long enough to just a few of these passes, and you could pin your ship to the map with an accuracy mariners would have called witchcraft a century earlier. By 1960, a transit satellite helped submarines know where they were before they dove silent again. You imagine those boats exhaling like whales, then slipping back under with a secret that was mostly timing. The sound of it, in your mind's ear, is a calm, mathematical sigh. Then the idea grows a spine. In 1973, a program begins with a name that sounds like a handshake and a boast, Navstar. The thought is to swap Doppler patience for relentless precision. Launch a flock of clocks so good they make your wristwatch feel like a toy. Arrange them in medium-high paths, and ask them to whisper the time with such discipline that your receiver could measure distance by lateness. Every light begins as someone's stubborn idea, you remember. And this idea is stubborn about milliseconds. Because here's the secret you learn to love. Distance is merely time dressed in meters. If you can hear when a pulse left and when it arrived, you can draw a sphere around yourself with that radius. Hear 4 such spheres, and the world admits where you stand. You visit a clean room that smells like new plastic and cold air. Inside a bus the size of a dining table, boxes that look disappointingly plain hold cesium and rubidium hearts, warmed and coddled so their ticking won't drift. Engineers at Rockwell and elsewhere nurse these pulses until the jitter shrinks to the size of pride. The first prototype satellite rides in 1978, a quiet demonstrator. More follow, climbing to roughly 20,200 kilometers, each circling the Earth twice a day, their orbits staggered like notes on a staff to ensure that anywhere you stand, a quartet will be within earshot. L1 at 1,575.42 MHz. L2 at 1,227.6. Later, another L5 sings for safety of life. You don't memorize the numbers so much as feel them as a clean, dry tone in the jawbone of your radio. The language is simple, almost shy. Each traveler repeats a code that looks like noise, until your receiver recognizes the pattern and slides into phase with it. The way you're breathing unconsciously matches a sleeper's in a quiet room. The moment lock happens, your screen steadies. Pseudorange appears distances by borrowed time. Trilateration unfolds like origami in reverse. 3 spheres intersect in a circle. A 4th sphere pinches that circle into a point. A 5th and 6th polish away the lies told by air and clock. A chip smaller than your thumbnail conducts this slow magic while hardly warming your palm. The smell in the cabin is coffee and dust. The sound in the cabin is confidence. Facts keep us faithful, the constellation declares. Initial operational capability in 1993. Full operational capability in 1995. 24 primary craft become the drumbeat of position. In 1983, after the tragedy of Korean Airlines Flight 007 wandering into forbidden sky and being shot down, a pledge arrives. This timing gift will be open to civilians when mature. In May 2000, selective availability, the deliberate blur that fuzzed civilian accuracy switches off with a click that felt like a curtain lifting. Overnight, garden variety receivers sharpen from city block to doorway. You remember that horn in Maine, how hello crossed an ocean. Here the greeting is location itself. You are here, it whispers. And for once the phrase is true. The sea is not the only listener. On a mountain trail that smells of crushed fir and cold granite, a hiker's pocket chirps at the same sky. In a cockpit tasting of de-ice fluid and hot wiring, an approach glider path draws as a green ribbon, exact and tender. On a combine harvester rolling through wheat that sighs like an old radio, rows straighten into parallel poems as guidance nibbles error down to inches. Surveyors lean on bipods whose antenna hats drink time. A bridge's middle span meets its ends because a silent set of clocks above said when to pour and when to wait. Even the power grid, a choreography of phase angles, learns to keep itself in time by borrowing sky pulses. Order, it turns out, is a scented candle that smells like nanoseconds. You stand again on that night deck. The receiver's screen shows 4 little bars, each a traveller's voice. PRN numbers like nicknames. 1 bar fades, another rises, and your position dot stays still, as loyal as a dog that has finally decided you are worth guarding. You watch your speed display flirt with 0.3 knots as the current tickles the hull. The readout's decimals seem absurd until you move, and the absurdity converts to grace your course over ground line bends like a pencil drawing carving the dark. The reef suddenly feels less like a rumour and more like a note on a staff you can avoid with a half step. Philosophy leans on the rail with you. To know where you are is to finally admit where you are not. The gift is not power, but humility, a correction written in the margin of your hunches. Every signal, you think, is a small apology to the unknown. You remember the belts we discovered, how the invisible weather demanded respect, and you feel that same education in this invisible time beam, insisting that certainty be earned, not declared. In a meadow, a child lets a paper boat go in a creek and tags its path in an app without knowing what constellation keeps her map true. In a city, a courier's scooter purrs like a polite cat between alleys, the blue dot threading traffic with impossible calm. In an ambulance, a medic glances down and sees arrival time shrink, not because roads are kinder, but because decisions are. The sound of this chapter is not a beep. It's the tick you do not hear, the tick that lets every other sound arrive when it should. The system learns to be generous and cautious at once. Augmentation Services WAAS over the Americas, EGNOS across Europe, MSAS, and the rest lay grids of corrections across the sky, measuring how air slows signals and whispering the fix to anyone who asks. Integrity flags rise like polite hands when something goes out of tune. Across the world, cousins learn the same craft, GLONASS humming in Russian, later Galileo playing a European melody, Beidou tracing its Chinese constellation so that a receiver in your pocket now listens polyglot, combining choirs into one choir loft, a redundancy that feels like kindness. But you don't need the acronyms tonight. You need only the feeling of a number serving as a lantern. The air smells sharper. The wake flashes under the moon like silver thread. Your breath falls into a rhythm with the small processor under your palm, working 1,000,000 multiplications each second, and never asking for praise. In the cabin, the chart plotter throws a soft blue light on a chipped mug. On the mug, Someone once wrote with a marker, "Trust the math." You set it down, and it lands with a hollow, homely clink. Remember the candlelit room in Kaluga, where a circle around Earth fit on a page. Remember the scarred engines that rose rudely into decency. Remember the first beep crossing the night, and the first image of cloud that taught forecasters to whisper. Remember the ring that sits still so news could learn to arrive on time. All that, every stubborn idea, every correction taught by failure, now pours itself into a pulse that leaves a clock, touches vacuum, threads ionosphere, and enters your little antenna with the patience of rain. A delay of a few 10,000ths of a second here, a few there. Summed, solved, forgiven. On the far side of morning, the boat eases into a harbour that smells of rope and old wood and pancakes. The wharf light throws a gold smear on the water, and gulls file their complaints like clerks beginning their shift. You look back at the dark you crossed, and feel the odd tenderness of having been guided by something that never touched you. Direction, you decide, is how time becomes kindness. You tie off, test the knot, and listen as the receiver, finally idle, falls quiet. Its last act, a timestamp on a log that will look boring and therefore perfect. You arrive before dawn at a beach that smells of salt and kerosene, where floodlights turn the sand white and December breath makes small ghosts. A polished little rocket stands at Cape Canaveral, slim as a promise, carrying a grapefruit-sized sphere with antennas like whiskers. Reporters murmur, neckties flutter, and you can taste metal on the wind. The date is the 6th of December, 1957. The payload is Vanguard TV-3, meant to start a polite American chapter after a Soviet beep stole the world's sleep. The countdown is a lullaby of numbers. Ignition flares brief, bright, hopeful, and then the body rises a meter, hesitates, sags, and folds back into its own fire. A popping thud, a blossom of flame, a sound like a door slamming the wrong century shut. The sphere, miraculously intact, rolls a few feet away and keeps chirping. People laugh because they are frightened. Headlines tomorrow will say, "Flopnik." You pocket the lesson. The sky is not sentimental. You walk the pad later with the scent of burned paint in your hair. The concrete is freckled with soot, aluminum glitter stuck like confetti after a party that forgot to be kind. Engineers kneel and pick at slag, faces chalked with ash and embarrassment. Every light begins as someone's stubborn idea, you remind yourself. But stubbornness must learn manners. In the blockhouse, a chalkboard fills with arrows showing where a fuel line vibrated at the wrong frequency. Somewhere, a young propellant specialist stares at his coffee and blinks too long. Failure sings in the key of education. You flip through a quiet catalogue of missteps. Early Atlas Able attempts to loft lunar probes. 1,960 disassemble themselves mid-hope. An Ariane 5 inches 1,996 reads a number with the wrong-sized box and turns an inaugural triumph into a 37-second arc of unhelpful fireworks. In 1993, Landsat 6 rides to space and never blinks awake. A sensor suite destined to map fields and forests becomes a silence drawn on a ledger. In 1990, a mirror polished to breathtaking wrongness gives a space telescope a blurred gaze, so precise in its error it might as well be art. 3 years later, astronauts fit spectacles called Telstar on Hubble and teach the universe to come into focus. You taste the tin of EVA air in your imagination and hear the click of latches finding remorse. You run a fingertip across a scar on a satellite bus in a clean room that smells of isopropyl and rubber bands. A placard explains with unusual candor, single event upset during testing, watchdog saved vehicle. Cosmic rays do not care about budgets. A high-energy spec can flip a bit from 0 to 1 like a mischievous child turning a light switch. So we answer with redundancy and grace. Triple modular voting, so 2 good voices outvote a liar. Radiation-hardened memory that forgets less. Sun sensors paired with star trackers. Magnetorkers and reaction wheels practicing a waltz called detumble. Fault detection, isolation, and recovery. FDIR becomes a liturgy, whispered by flight controllers who carry pens like talismans. Sometimes, the fire comes from us. The 9th of July, 1962. Starfish Prime. Tears a temporary aurora out of the Pacific night and salts the Van Allen belts with extra teeth. Weeks later, Telstar's transistors feel the bite. The picture flickers, the sound coughs. Engineers nurse the little relay through episodes until the sky's anger finally spends itself. 4 decades on, October, November 2003, the Halloween storms rumble down the field lines and satellites ride with seatbelts tight. In February 2022, a geomagnetic hiccup swells the upper air, and a flock of small newcomers fresh from a gentle launch finds itself ploughing, thicker atmosphere than expected, losing energy, and falling, 40 or so re-entering like brief, embarrassed meteors. The air looks the same, the physics does not. Space weather keeps office hours only for itself. You stand in a control room where the color is fluorescent and the scent is warm plastic. A console chirps, then steadies, then chirps again. Loss of lock, someone says. In 2010, Galaxy 15 drifts zombie-sat. The papers call it its transmitter, politely staying on while it forgets how to listen to ground, a quiet runaway gliding along the geostationary belt. Operators downstream sidestep with tiny station-keeping burns. Neighbors pulling in folding chairs to clear a path until, months later, the wanderer's battery finally sleeps and the spell breaks. A near miss becomes a folk tale told in conferences that smell of coffee and carpet. Out the window of your memory, 2 bodies meet at orbital speed. It is February 2009, above Siberia, when defunct Cosmos 2251 and an Iridium craft share the same coordinates for a fraction of a psi and convert precision into shrapnel. The collision makes a cloud, and the cloud makes new arithmetic. Conjunction screens, avoidance burns, debris modeling as daily bread. You picture tiny, bright flecks tumbling like glitter, in sunlight beautiful, useless, dangerous. We become responsible, you think, for the echoes of our own ingenuity. And then, the quieter embarrassments. In 2003, technicians in a California cleanroom forget to attach bolts. A NOAA satellite, N prime, tips from its stand and kisses the floor with the force of a dropped piano. The photographs are painful and gentle at once. People in bunny suits, heads bowed, hands on hips, learning humility with paperwork. On a different day, a technician leaves a lens cap on a star tracker and wonders why the heavens look like night forever. These are not dramatic. They are intimate, the clumsy moments that keep processes honest. The smell in those rooms is the same as always. Solvent, cardboard, apology. But listen to how quickly failure teaches fluency. Vanguard's blush fertilizes Explorer's poise. Hubble's headache gives birth to a generation of servicing choreography and to ground test protocols that bow to optics like altar boys. Ariane's misread number becomes a manifesto for software verification, static analysis, independent teams, test vectors thrown like snowballs. Debris events harden norms, mitigation guidelines, passivation procedures, venting prop tanks, end-of-life burns, and, where burns are impossible, graveyard orbits a few 100 kilometers higher, a quiet attic for old machines to nap. Even paperwork learns manners, more checklists, fewer assumptions, signatures that mean, I checked with my hands as well as my eyes. You sit beside a propulsion engineer while he calibrates a throttle valve the size of your thumb. The bench test sings a thin alcohol smell. Margins, he says, are where kindness lives. He shows you curves, thrust versus temperature, valve chatter tamed by a better spring, injector patterns tweaked so combustion doesn't learn to scream. The sound of a stable burn is a low, persuasive purr. The sound of instability is a drumroll of dread. He hears both in his bones now, which is why his machines rarely shout. At a small university, students build a cube no larger than a loaf of bread. Their lab smells like pizza and solder. The first unit tumbles and dies. The second learns to catch the sun. The third phones home with a shy, perfect packet, and the room erupts like a birthday party. Open-source flight software gains patches. Power budgets get honest. Antennas get a better hinge. Shrinking to a shoebox did not exempt the craft from the sky's exams. It simply made the lessons arrive earlier, kinder, and cheaper. You walk back to the pad at Cape Canaveral, where the breeze tastes of warm brine. There is a scar in the concrete where a vehicle once misunderstood. Grass has crept into the crack, small green flags in a field that has seen every shade of human intention. Every failure, you say softly, is a letter from the future, asking us to write back with better habits. The philosophy doesn't stop the shaking in your hands, it merely gives the shaking a reason. Inside a modern control room, alarms are smaller, smarter. A satellite yawns into safe mode when light feels wrong, pointing its face to the star that keeps it alive and waiting for a kind word from Earth. Ground controllers practice contingencies like musicians: loss of signal, stuck wheel, two-star geometry, sun blackout, station-keeping drift. Simulators throw curveballs with glee. Teams fumble, recover, laugh thinly, then try again. Practice replaces panic. Dignity is a discipline learned on quiet Tuesdays. Remember the candle in Kaluga, the soft rasp of a nib that drew the first circle. Remember the bruised engines that learned decency. Remember the beeps that organized wonder, and the belts that warned us to respect the unseen. Remember the horn that said hello across a sea, and the ring that stays politely still. All of it was paid for not just with success, but with sparks that landed wrong, mirrors ground incorrectly, clocks that drifted, screws forgotten, storms that reach through vacuum like long fingers. The sky is cruel, only in the sense that it is consistent. Our mercy lies in learning. Night deepens. The pad lights click off, one by one, a row of eyelids closing. Somewhere, high and faithful, machines we once shouted at now glide with mature silence, their hearts triply redundant, their minds trained to wait. You place your palm on a railing still warm from the day and listen to the metal cool, a tiny tick, 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 like a clock growing kind again. Fire, tumble, fix, repeat. This is how a species learns to hang lanterns in the dark without burning down the porch. You step into a lab that smells like flux, cardboard, and last night's pizza, and find a constellation waiting to happen on folding tables. Under fluorescent hum, students in anti-static coats lean over a cube that could fit in two cupped hands, 10 centimeters aside, edges black with anodized rails, faces tiled with solar cells like a beetle's back. Someone mutters about a U-art. Someone else wields tweezers with the tenderness of a watchmaker. A poster on the wall reads, "Measure twice, vibe, test thrice." You breathe in the metallic sweetness of fresh solder, and the air feels a little charged, as if ambition itself had a voltage. In 1999, at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, and Stanford, two professors, Jordi Puig-Suari and Bob Twiggs, sketched a standard that would turn classrooms into launch pads. A 1-liter cube, stackable, simple, with a spring-loaded deployer named the PPOD that could bolt to a rocket like polite luggage. The idea was not to shrink the sky, but to lower the door. Build small, fly often, fail kindly, learn fast. Every light begins as someone's stubborn idea. You remember, and this one wore sneakers and carried a hot glue gun. Paper becomes panels. Panels become a bus. A magnetometer stretches out like a cat testing a windowsill. Reaction wheels, tiny flywheels, no bigger than macarons, wait to whisper momentum back and forth, a ballet of stored spin. A sun sensor gets its first taste of fluorescence and lies about daylight until someone slides a hand over it and the numbers behave. The room's soundtrack is the crisp click of torque driver clutches, the soft chuff of a bench supply waking to deliver 5 volts, the small victory noise a student makes when a heartbeat packet tiptoes across a terminal window and spells out, "Hello from orbit someday." History arrives wearing a backpack. June 2003. The first little cubes ride a Russian rocket from Plesetsk. A mixed chorus of university voices. Aerospace Corporation, Cal Poly, Arizona State. More learning to survive the shaker table's percussion and the vacuum chamber's quiet disdain. Doors slide, springs scoot. The cubes tumble into day and night, their antennas unrolling like delicate tongues, and classrooms on different continents yelp when a whisper of telemetry finds home in an improvised ground station made from roof racks and hope. The smell of heated dust on a new amplifier becomes a kind of incense. You stand beside a vibration table as it growls up through resonance. Screws sing. A student presses her palms to her thighs and breathes like someone watching a child wobble without training wheels. When the test shuts down, the cube looks exactly the same. The relief is tidal. Remember those scarred engines from our earlier nights, the way pain learned to be teacher. Here the teacher is smaller, but stern. Tighten here, pot that wire, move that antenna 2 millimeters before it learns to hate the door. The facts stack neatly. 1U, 3U, 6U, 12U, modular sizes, like Lego for the highness of things. By 2012, Planet Labs will take the form and swarm with it, launching flocks of Dove's 3U imagers, with eyes the color of patience to scan Earth daily. Farms, forests, floods, the braided changes of rivers, the blush and scab of cities. The pictures arrive with the fidelity of habit rather than spectacle, and the world discovers the quiet power of every day. In 2013, NASA's PhoneSats ride low, using off-the-shelf smartphones as brains, gyros, and cameras already baked in, a wink that says thrift is a kind of elegance. Even the station in the sky learns to be a garden fence. From the International Space Station's Japanese Kibo module, a small deployer opens like a bento box and flicks cubes into sunlight, the way a careful hand sends fireflies from a jar. In 2014, you watch a pair of rectangles slip free and begin to spin, their panels flashing yes, no, in the wake of a blue planet with weather moving like thought. The station's windows smell faintly of spacesuit fabric and recycled air. Your breath fogs the glass for an instant and then clears, and the paths below look handmade. The ambition is not cute. 2018, 2 briefcases named Marco E and F, but friends call them Wally and Eve, follow NASA's InSight toward Mars, unfurling X-band reflectors like golden pizza slices. When InSight dives toward the Martian plain, the small companions catch the lander's telemetry in real time and hand it to the Deep Space Network with the competence of old pros. A first, interplanetary cubes carrying the message across a cold hallway. You listen on Earth as tones arrive like timid birds that somehow found the ocean's far side, and you taste the aluminum of awe. Sails, too, learn to unfurl from small pockets. In 2019, LightSail 2 unwraps a 3 square meter mylar diamond and proves you can tack on sunlight the faintest push, the oldest engine. In 2014, tiny sprites printed like postage stamps ride as kicksat passengers, each a chip with a mind, whistling their names for anyone with a coat hanger yagi and precision in the neck. The romance isn't size, it's scale. Many small hands holding up a large sky. Of course, the universe is not sentimental. Little bodies can become little hazards. A few fail and go dark. A few ignore their chores. Constellations crowd lanes. Space traffic management turns from genteel chess to a street with scooters, and the word conjunction shows up in more inboxes than anyone dreamt. You hear the rustle of policy papers, the stern music of guidelines. Track better, share ephemerides, add deorbit devices, spring-loaded drag sails, low perigee paths that promise to fall in months, not decades. Freedom, you think, is just responsibility wearing nicer shoes. No. Back in the lab, a student shakes a can of conformal coating and fogs a green board with a lacquer smell like model airplanes. Another tests a burn wire that should snap a nylon tether and release an arm. The wire blushes orange. The thread goes from taut to mercy in a second. The room laughs, thin and relieved. A third student writes the star tracker code that will catch asterisms like fishermen catch constellations. A fourth hunts a power leak that turns out to be a sleepy LDO regulator waking at the wrong hour. The poetry of this room is procedural. Flat sat, vibe, thermal vac, mission simulation, go, no go. All sung with the patience of people who know that checklists are love letters to tomorrow. On a roof that smells of tar and sun, a ground station points a crossed pair of yagis at the sky and whispers into the void. The first pass is too low. The second is a shy miss. The third brings a packet that tastes of triumph on the tongue. The waterfall display shows a thin blue scratch sliding with the Doppler curve, and then text walks into the console: battery volts, board temps, a heartbeat flag toggling like a candle behind a window. You remember the beeps from 1957, that pebble in the pond of the world's attention, and you realize how the sound has deepened. Same hello, new address book. Rideshare becomes routine. A New Century's rocket's Falcon 9 flights labeled Transporter. Vega's SSMS, PSLV's co-passenger pages open their fairings like carpools. 100 little dreams ride under one metal shell, each in its berths, each with a slot in the deployment script that reads like a poem about fairness. The fairing air smells like cold metal and nitrogen. The countdown voice is composed and sweet. The latches click like disciplined rain. Door, spring, sun, tumble, detumble, talk order, from courage, courage, from community. Philosophy leans close again and speaks softly, because the fans are loud. What is the opposite of monopoly? Not chaos, but chorus. The shoebox invites 100 authors to draft a sky-wide sentence. Farmers watching soil moisten. Firefighters mapping heat through smoke. Sailors finding wind by color. Biologists tracking ice that exhales seasons. Teachers declaring a Friday downlink day, so a 7th grader can hear her code come back from a thing she can't point to without squinting. Scale compassion, you murmur, feeling how civic it sounds. Challenges persist, and discipline is the counterweight. A class learns that magnetorquers saturate when the field is shy. Another discovers that batteries freeze into sulk without a warm hug of wattage. A third finds that a bright planet can trick a star tracker into bragging. After each bruise, the checklists thicken and the smiles grow more earned. Remember Section 11's letters from the future, tumbles, drifts, lost bolts, and how they taught manners. Here, the manners arrive at pocket scale and travel swiftly between schools with the generosity of open PDFs and midnight forum threads. Dawn pushes through the lab windows, a rectangle of quiet light sliding across a table, where a cube waits in its deployer, springs coiled like breath held. You rest your fingers on the aluminum and feel a faint chill from the air conditioning that never sleeps. In that cool, careful stillness, you remember the candle in Kaluga, the scarred engines, the first chase across October skies, the belts that wrapped us like invisible shawls, the horn that said, hello, the patient ring, the secret film, the tick of timing, the collapses that taught humility. All those chapters now fold into this soft-edged box, where ambition has learned to be small without being lesser. A student kills the bench power. The LEDs fade with tiny, stubborn grace. Silence thickens. For a moment, the cube looks like a toy. And then you picture it a few weeks from now, sprung into sunlight, panels sipping, brain waking, antenna whispering a name into a wind that does not exist. Small, you decide, is just another way to be precise. The room exhales, and the day begins. You step outside into an evening that smells like cooling asphalt and juniper, and the sky is a dark lake waiting for stones. Somewhere to the west, a rocket exhales and then forgets to breathe again. Minutes later, a faint procession lifts above the horizon, points of light spaced like pearls on a careful string. A neighbor gasps. A child counts out loud. The dots drift, widen their gaps, and fold into the general grammar of stars. But you've seen the rehearsal. Trains tonight, a lattice tomorrow. The night is learning a new choreography. In a control room that tastes of coffee and fan-cooled air, a wall of screens shows a map of the world cross-hatched with paths. A cursor hovers over a shell at roughly 500-something kilometers. A ring where drag still whispers and deorbit is a promise measured in years, not centuries. Operators murmur about TLEs and burns. Tiny numbers adjust. 1,000 small decisions keep the lattice from knotting. The hum in the room is almost tender, the sound of machines doing exactly what they were asked. Every light begins as someone's stubborn idea, you recall, and tonight the idea is that coverage can be woven, not merely aimed. The decade turns, and launches become a drumbeat rather than a solo. In May 2019, the first big flock of a certain broadband constellation rides uphill on a reusable booster. Panels unfolding in sunlight like a deck of cards fanned by a magician who prefers math. Soon the count is in the hundreds, then thousands, satellites stacked and deployed with the efficiency of a practiced carpenter feeding planks into a roof. Another company stitches a polar mesh, a third sketches medium orbit rings for navigation cousins, an Earth imaging fleet refines its daily scan into a morning and afternoon ritual. The sky begins to resemble a beehive where the bees are patient and the honey is bandwidth. You visit a warehouse that hums like a refrigerator thinking hard. On one side, flat user terminals phased array dishes that look like white pizzas arrive on pallets and leave in pickup trucks. On the other, racks of electronics blink polite greens, while a test stand bathes a mock satellite in radio, whispers that mimic the entire planet arguing about spectrum. A faint smell of cut foam and solder hides under the fluorescent lights. A technician taps a screen, and a sweeping lobe appears. steering without moving. A millisecond ballet that lets rooftops converse with objects you cannot see. The magic has always been how we aim. Now, we aim with math. The facts keep their pace. Orbital shells lie at distinct heights. Planes are offset like teeth, so the fabric has no holes. Laser interlinks optical breath between neighbors. Begin to stitch path to path, so polar seas and deserts, no fiber ever loved, can hear human voices with little delay. You imagine those beams as violin strings pulled tight across vacuum, singing a note no ear can hear, and yet your phone will obey it by fetching a page or placing a call. Distance, you think, is beginning to run out of excuses. You return to the backyard and feel the cold rim of binoculars against your eyebrows. For a while, in the first days after launch, the trains are bold astronomy's photobombers. Then each unit climbs, spreads, dims. Astronomers write circulars, observatories recalibrate, mitigation plans bloom like nocturnal flowers. Dark coatings appear, visors roll down, attitudes adjust during twilight. Software subtracts trails with weary grace. The sky is old, our tools are new. Manners are a negotiation. You hear crickets hiss. You smell damp cedar, and you hold two truths at once. Access to connection is a kindness. The night is a shared cathedral that asks for quiet shoes. Traffic thickens. Screens track conjunctions with a gravity of their own. One morning, a dashboard pings. A weather satellite clearing its throat. An aging rocket body loitering indifferently. A newcomer adjusting a plane. Emails fly like starlings. Calls are placed. A burn of a few centimeters per second turns a potential headline into a footnote. On another day, in 2019, a European mission nudges itself politely to avoid a new resident. In later years, a space station crew files a complaint about close passes. No collisions, only reminders. Geometry is generous until it isn't. In the low-orbit lanes, courtesy becomes legislation written in delta V and time to go. You stand beside a ground radar that smells of hot paint and rain, listening to a sweep you can't hear but feel in your shins. Its dish turns with a dignified shrug, mapping metal that does not glow. The operator, a quiet poet of ephemerides, points to a screen full of tags. She tells you which ones answer when called and which are ghosts. "We tend our cemetery," she says, meaning forgotten hardware. And the sentence sits with you like a pebble in a shoe you decline to remove. Mitigation becomes liturgy. Vent tanks, discharge batteries, plan exits, add drag sails that open like parasols. Fly low so that the air, slow but patient, will carry you back to bright streak and ash. Elsewhere, the swarm makes itself useful with a kind of cheerful competence. After a storm claws down pylons, terminals blink awake in tents that smell of plastic and wet wool, and let a neighborhood text, coordinate, request insulin, say, "We're okay." At sea, a trawler's cabin glows blue at midnight. A message goes through that 2 years ago would have waited for land. In a mountain village where fiber is a rumor, a clinic uploads scans, a teacher faces a laptop with winter breath visible, and greets faces that would otherwise be days away by bus. Compassion scales when latency shrinks. It is an unromantic arithmetic that still feels like grace. Philosophy leans close. Coverage sounds like a technical term, until you turn it over and see the face of participation. Who gets to belong to the conversation the rest of the world is already having? A mesh in the sky is not an answer to every question, but it is an answer to one of our oldest. How do we speak to those whom roads ignore? Connection, you murmur, is the shortest distance between responsibilities. Inside a clean room, a new batch arrives. Buses lined up like lozenges, each with a star tracker no bigger than a paperback's corner, each with a propulsion kit that smells faintly of a chemistry lab, each with a stack of solar cells that gleam like a calm lake. The assembly line is oddly tender torque wrenches kissing fasteners, labels printed with fonts that refuse drama, checklists that read like lullabies, verify, enable, arm, safe. You remember Section 12's shoeboxes and how many hands they invited. Now those hands graduate to a rhythm. Roll off, test, encapsulate, fly, repeat. Night again. The train is subtler now, more suggestion than parade, but your practiced eye still catches it. Somewhere, a deep space network dish drinks a whisper in K-band while, above and nearer, a web routes packets around thunderstorms with the pragmatism of a good road crew. You think of early horns in Maine and Brittany shouting across oceans. You think of the ring at 35,786 kilometers that learned to sit still. The swarm does not replace those elders. It braids with them. High patience for broadcasts and weather eyes. Low agility for the intimacy of two people asking something of each other right now. Regulators begin to talk like gardeners. Filings become fences. Spectral masks become hedges. Power flux density becomes the rule about how loud you may speak after 10 p.m. International tables shuffle. Domestic commissions draw maps in frequency instead of land. You stand in a hallway that smells of carpet and paper and hear acronyms argue gently. Protect incumbents. Enable innovation. Sunset debris at end of life. Law is just physics written for people. You think, and both do best when they assume fallibility. An observatory invites the constellation operators to a night on the mountain. The parking lot smells like cold brake pads. The dome smells like oil and old paint. Engineers and astronomers lean over the same plot. A scatter of trails across an exposure. Mitigations are sketched. Fainter albedo. Coordinated keep-out zones during key surveys. Predictive heads-ups, so shutters can blink at just the right time. No one is fully happy. Everyone is fully engaged. This is what adulthood feels like for a species that learned to hang lanterns everywhere, acknowledging neighbors, agreeing on quiet hours, bringing cookies to the meeting. Remember the candle in Kaluga, the first circle drawn like a promise. Remember the bruised engines, the beeping pebble of a sphere, the belts that warned us we live inside an invisible weather. Remember the horn that said hello, the patient ring where news learned to be immediate, the secret cameras that taught power to mind its manners, the timing pulses that turned distance into honesty, the failures that wrote us kinder habits, the shoeboxes that democratized audacity. The swarm is all of these lessons wearing a work shirt, not glamorous, not cruel, persistent, and when we are careful, profoundly humane. You step back from the yard, the dew on the grass cools your ankles. Above you, points of light have returned to anonymity, which is their preferred attire. Somewhere a router blinks, a dish tilts a degree, a laser link bites cleanly and lets go. The night feels intact. Scale without arrogance, you say softly, a wish disguised as a design requirement. A moth knocks once against the porch bulb and moves on. You breathe, slow. The choreography continues, mostly invisible, a kindness that prefers not to be thanked. You lean on a railing that smells like frost and machine oil, and the horizon is not an ocean this time, but a cratered face close enough to feel like a neighbor. The voice in your headset is calm, professional, and a little amazed. A small craft, boxy and sincere, fires tiny jolts of thrust and slips into a loop around the moon, the burn arcing like a held breath released. In your mind you hear the earlier beeps and belts and weather eyes, and then you hear this new sound, the soft hum of a traveler finding a new home. On the 14th of September 1959, Luna 2 had already slammed itself into the lunar plane like a message without return. 4 weeks later, on October 4, Luna 3 swings behind the moon and, with a camera that would embarrass your phone, sends back the first ghostly photos of the hidden hemisphere. The pictures bloom on paper, smelling of developer and patience. Unknown land becomes a fact. The moon grows crowded, politely. In 1966, Lunar Orbiter frames potential Apollo landing sites with detail that makes engineers point and nod. In 1967, Surveyor 6 hops in place and teaches dust to stop scaring us. Decades later, in 2009, Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter skims so low you could almost imagine hearing pebbles whisper and maps the surface at 50-centimeter sharpness, catching the old Apollo trails as pale threads, and the shadows of flagpoles like breath held. A place becomes a library. You run a finger along a print, tracing the rim of Tycho, as if outlining a shoulder under a blanket. Every light begins as someone's stubborn idea, you remind yourself, and stubbornness is just curiosity taught to carry a suitcase. Then, the red planet clears its throat. In 1971, Mariner 9 arrives during a planet-wide dust storm, an ochre shroud that makes astronomers swallow disappointment like sand. It waits, patient as a heron. When the air settles, The camera sees canyons longer than nations. Valles marineris, volcanoes that climb past 20 kilometers, and old channels where water once wrote cursive across basalt. In 1976, Viking orbiters become cartographers for two landers, watching shoots blossom, relaying weather, photographing frost that crackles blue at dawn. The data room smells of ozone and thermal paper. The printers chatter like nervous teeth. Machine eyes teach us to be tender with the idea of ancient rivers. Years later, Mars Global Surveyor, 1997, and then Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, 2006, take the baton and run the long relay. One finds magnetic stripes in the crust that whisper of an early dynamo. The other snaps avalanches caught mid-fall, dunes that creep like our hands, and tracks that rovers etch with the politeness of visitors who plan to clean up after themselves. High-rise images arrive so crisp you can see pebbles, and yet what you feel most is the wind. The way thin air moves dust like thought moves memory. To look long enough, you think, is to turn rumour into geography. Elsewhere, metal learns other dialects. Venus, wrapped in clouds that smell of sulphur, receives visitors willing to sweat. In the 1970 seconds and early 80 seconds, Venera orbiters and landers from the Soviet program send back pressure readings heavy enough to bruise a submarine, temperatures that would fricassee a wrench, and at last, surface photos, a grainy, orange world of cracked plates and bowling ball rocks, while the microphones would have captured thunder if thunder could survive there. In 1990, Magellan slips into orbit, and using radar as a blind person uses fingertips. Maps 98% of the planet at hundreds of meters resolution, revealing volcanoes by the thousands and flow fields like spilled candle wax. The radio echoes taste metallic in your imagination. On the console, a strip chart draws a serrated line. A scientist murmurs, "Another pass," as if asking a waltz to continue. Jupiter is too far to smell, but its magnetosphere tastes in your teeth like static. In 1995, Galileo drops a probe into the clouds, while the orbiter loops for years, photographing the bruise of comet Shoemaker-Levy 9's scars, and the jigsaw ice of Europa cracks like blue veins, hinting at an ocean kept warm by friction. The sound you invent for that ocean is a far, wet hush. In 2016, Juno arrives, polar and purposeful, listening to the giant's heartbeat through gravity and painting the poles with storms that look like cream stirred into coffee. The telemetry sings in kilobits, modest and monumental, and a philosopher inside you whispers, "Some storms are too beautiful to fear." Saturn, ringed and theatrical, receives company that behaves like a gentleman. Cassini, arriving in 2004, after slinging past planets like a polite thief of momentum, spends 13 years teaching us how rings hum and moons misbehave. In 2005, the Huygens probe floats down through Titan's orange haze and lands with a soft thud on pebbles that have never heard a footstep. Methane rivers, hydrocarbon seas, ice behaving like rock and rock behaving like ice, the paradoxes pile up like gifts. Cassini's cameras catch Enceladus, exhaling geysers of water vapor at the South Pole. The plumes glitter like confetti thrown by a moon that hides an ocean. Near the end, 2017, the craft threads the space between rings and planet, dust pinging the hull like rain on a tin roof, then dives into the atmosphere as planned, becoming heat and memory and data, until the signal narrows to a line and then to nothing. You listen to the last tones, the way one listens to a friend's voice fade in a long tunnel, grateful for every syllable. Out beyond, New Horizons nicks past Pluto in July 2015, a flyby so fast you could blink and miss a mountain. But nothing is missed. A heart-shaped plain of nitrogen frost, mountains of water ice, a sky so thin the haze stacks in blue layers like tissue paper. The craft hums its story back over hours and days. The Deep Space Network dishes in California, Spain, and Australia, drinking whispers from 4.5 light hours away. The control room smells like stale coffee and new tears. Pluto, once a punctuation mark, becomes a paragraph. At asteroids, Patience wears boots. Dawn spirals with ion engines, a xenon psi, blue and faithful, to Vesta in 2011 and Ceres in 2015, finding a bright salt stain on a dark crater floor that looks like an eye opening. Osiris-Rex kisses Bennu in 2020, the touch and go sending rubble fountaining like a sigh that had been held since the solar system was young. The sample comes home in 2023, the desert welcoming a charred capsule with the smell of scorched cloth and relief. Small worlds become diaries, pages dog-eared by impacts and sunlight. Even the sun gets a companion that dares proximity. In 2018, Parker Solar Probe begins its brazen loops, skimming closer and closer, riding behind Venus like a surfer stealing momentum, tasting the corona, and hearing the music of Alphane waves you cannot pronounce without smiling. The heat shield crackles like a piece of toast in a heroic toaster. Data returns as numbers without drama, fields, particles, speeds. But the picture in your head is bright enough to require a squint. Moons far from home take attendance. In 2021, China's Tianwen-1 settles around Mars, its orbiter relaying for the Zhurong rover, rolling through Utopia Planitia with the careful arrogance of a newcomer who studied. In 2008, and again in 2019, India's Chandrayaan program adds selenography and South Pole ambition. In 2023 and 2024, new landers kiss near shadowed craters, while orbiters map illumination like watchmakers measuring a ticking wrist. Japan's Selene Kaguya sends back HD TV vistas of the moon that make you feel you've forgotten your helmet. Europe's Mars Express, still dutiful since 2003, sniffs for methane and sketches subsurface structures. Maven, since 2014, counts how Mars loses atmosphere to space, a thin wind carrying a thin past away grain by grain. Names accumulate like constellations, and each one hums a note that blends into a chord you did not know you needed. And in all of it, this spread of patient companions circling foreign skies, the essentials rhyme with the first circles drawn beside a candle. Fuel economies chased, gravity assists bargained for like train transfers on an interplanetary timetable. Occultations read like pulse checks, aerobraking whispered into thin air until orbits shrink. The senses learn new jobs. Ring dust, pattering against a hull becomes weather. A Doppler curve becomes a portrait. A magnetometer's squiggle becomes the outline of an ocean you cannot sail but can imagine. Seeing far, you think, is how a species learns to be gentle at home. Remember the teachers that came before, the bruise-born engines, the beeping pebble, the belts that offered their invisible warning, the horn that said hello across an ocean, the ring that learned to wait, the secret film that taught manners, the timing pulses that turned the map honest, the failures that gave us calluses, the shoeboxes and swarms that scaled attention. All that practice now orbits elsewhere, lanterns hung around other worlds. You stand at the rail and let the thought finish itself. Every moon with a humming companion is a promise that we are learning to visit without conquering. Far below, another burn completes. A craft slips into dawn over dunes of a planet that has never heard rain like ours. The sunlight there is thinner, the colour shifted, the horizon farther than your heart can comfortably hold. Your headset is warm against your ear. Static crackles like paper rubbed together. Then numbers arrive, tidy as grocery lists. Periapsis, apoapsis, inclination, health nominal. You smile in the dark and say nothing, because silence is the right applause when patience wins. Somewhere, the candle's reflection dances in the window of memory. Somewhere, a machine blinks and begins to take notes for us, very far away and very close. You walk out onto a quiet hillside that smells of crushed grass and cold stone, and the town below dims itself one porch at a time until only the river's ribbon and a few stubborn windows remain. The sky does what it has always done. It opens, but now you know it is not empty. A faint necklace lifts itself along predictable lines, slow pearls that are not stars, obedient lights that keep their appointments with geometry. You settle your back against a rock still warm from daylight, and listen for beeps that no longer sound, for cameras that do their work without applause, for clocks that keep time for grids and ships and hearts. The night is full of busy quiet. You think of the oldest, gentlest miracle these companions perform. They let us see ourselves. In July 1972, a satellite called Landsat 1 began a long, courteous habit photographing the Earth in wavelengths our eyes cannot judge from the ground. Forests become metrics, not rumors. Coastlines can be measured in patience. A glacier's retreat is no longer a story told by grandfathers, but a curve drawn across decades. In classrooms that smell of dry markers and curiosity, students drag a slider from then to now and feel the difference between memory and map. Every light begins as someone's stubborn idea, you recall, and some ideas simply hold the mirror steady. The necklace is also a lifeline. Far out at sea, a distress beacon bursts to life at 406 MHz. The Cospas SARSAT network listens, triangulates, and hands coordinates to people who move toward danger by choice. On a mountainside, a hiker's fall becomes a location before it becomes a story. In a storm-blind country, the first images after landfall stitch together roads that still exist, bridges that don't, neighborhoods that need a helicopter instead of hope. Pixels turn into routes, routes turn into rescues, rescues turn into bedtime in homes that still have roofs. Compassion rides radio. Not all gifts are dramatic. Some are as domestic as getting lost less. In a farm field, the color of bread, an autonomous tractor follows invisible ribbons and wastes fewer seeds. In a power grid, substations listen to a time signal and keep their phases true. The lights in your kitchen cease their small quarrels with the refrigerator at 2 a.m. In cities, buses approach when the little bar says they will, and being on time becomes less of a moral victory and more of a shared courtesy. Order, you realize, is just time behaving. Stoldo. But the quiet legacy is also the questions we learn to ask. Who owns a view? How bright may a lantern be in a cathedral that everyone shares? Astronomers lift long exposures and find scratches like cat whiskers. Operators answer with paint, with visors, with new attitudes at dusk and dawn. Laws, once written about land and water, sprout clauses about orbits and end-of-life conduct. You remember the lessons from our chapter of failures, the rollovers, the collisions, the mirror that needed spectacles, and you feel how those bruises hardened into norms. Vent your tanks, discharge your batteries, deorbit when you are done, move upstairs to the attic if you cannot go home. Courtesy, it turns out, is just engineering with a conscience. You inhale and the air tastes like sage and night. Over the equator, above weather and politics, patient sentinels keep their latitudes of attention. They pour down pictures of storms curling like commas, and a forecaster in an office that smells of coffee and rain writes a sentence that begins with the right verb, will, not might. In Europe, a sentinel pair stares at crops. In Africa, a community counts wells by colour from above. On the ocean, a scatterometer combs the wind and texts the fishermen without asking them to know its name. A planet that sees itself kindly begins to behave like a neighbour. There are shadows in the necklace. A test that shatters a satellite into pieces does not end with the pop. It begins a long weather of metal, orbits seeded with glitter that shines precisely wrong. A broken relay drifts, its manners forgotten, and other machines step aside. In control rooms, screens glow with conjunctions. Tiny burns reclaim centimeters of grace. The sky reminds us that success multiplies obligations faster than trophies. We are responsible, you whisper, for how our echoes behave. And yet, look what the echoes carry. Languages find each other and survive. A grandmother sees a grandson's first steps in real time instead of in the past tense. A village sells crafts without waiting for a road. A doctor reads a scan while the bed is still warm. An artist uploads a lullaby that helps someone you will never meet fall asleep. Signals cross mountains faster than grief. When they are kind, they turn strangers into citizens. You roll your shoulder against the stone and let the past sections seep back through you, the candle where a schoolteacher drew a circle and named it possible. The engines that learned, unwillingly at first, to be our ladders, the first bead of sound that taught the world to listen. The belts that warned us we live inside a magnet's slow embrace. The horns that traded hello across an ocean. The ring of stillness that made immediacy a habit. The secret film that taught power to mind its manners. The pulses that taught distance to confess. The stumbles that sanded arrogance into procedure. The shoeboxes that democratized audacity. The swarms that braided coverage with caution. The humming companions that tucked themselves around other worlds. All of it is here, condensed into these slow wanderers overhead, steady as a heartbeat you can't quite hear but trust anyway. A meteor abrades the night natural brief, unbothered by our machines. In its wake, a slower point keeps its line, faithful to Kepler and to the breath of a thruster you'll never smell. You understand, suddenly, the tenderness of maintenance, the updates, the station-keeping nudges, the calm software that takes a huff of sunlight and translates it into battery comfort. The legacy is not a statue, it's a practice. Night after night the necklace holds, and our lives get a little more synchronized with one another. You take out your phone and, out of habit, look at the time. It is correct in a way that would have stunned your great-grandfather. Somewhere, an atomic tick left a house in the sky, threaded air, and arrived in your palm. That small truth that we agree what time it is has become the pedestal for all the other agreements. Where, when, how. Everything we build, you think, is a rehearsal for trust. Down the hill, a porch light clicks off. Above the ridge, a final traveller slips into Earth's shadow and disappears, not gone, but resting. The river says nothing wise, which is wisdom of its own. You breathe, you count, you smile. The quiet legacy above is not power, it is companionship, faithful, unassuming, and shared. Slow the breath. Let the hillside cool beneath your shoulder blades, and notice how the rock returns the day's warmth to you in small, even sips. The town is almost finished putting itself to bed. The windows that remain are promises rather than exceptions. Overhead, the choreography continues without asking for your attention, and that, perhaps, is the sweetest kindness lanterns keeping watch so that people may forget them and sleep. The workshop we visited at the beginning is dark now. The candle has collapsed into a tiny dish of hardened wax. On that desk, the circle drawn in ink is only a line again, but above it, the real circle loops and loops, untroubled, exact, and patient. In other rooms, tools rest. In other control centers, monitors dim. The hum of servers softens to a cat-like purr. Somewhere, a dish at the edge of a desert makes a last correction you cannot hear and then holds still. Dust settles on a gantry. Salt dries on a hull. A coil of cable relaxes into a more generous curve. Let your thoughts slow until they keep time with the long orbits. Each revolution is a lullaby stanza, repeating just enough to be known, changing just enough to be alive. We built these companions out of stubbornness, but their long gift is gentleness. They notice for us, they measure for us, they speak for us. When oceans or mountains intrude, everything we build becomes part of the dream of progress. And in that dream, the best machines are the ones that make room for human quiet. Imagine, as your eyes grow heavy, the necklace dimming one bead at a time as each traveller slips into Earth's shadow, a soft fade rather than an ending. Imagine the workshop broom leaning in the corner, the chalk resting, the horn asleep in its field, the ring above the equator humming at a volume only the sky can hear. The night asks nothing urgent. The world is carried for now, and you are carried with it.